The CEO's voice cut through the workshop like a blade, cold, final, unforgiving. "You're fired." Ethan Cole didn't flinch as grease-stained hands packed his tools, didn't argue as security escorted him past 50 silent faces. He was just a mechanic who'd broken protocol, used outdated methods, embarrassed the company. Lauren Hale had made her point. At Orion Motors, image was everything. But as Ethan's truck disappeared down the industrial road, neither of them heard it yet, the distant thunder growing louder, closer, impossible to ignore. The helicopter was coming, and everything Lauren thought she knew about the man she'd just destroyed was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. If you want to see how a single moment of cruelty can unravel an empire and reveal the hero hiding in plain sight, stay with me until the end, and when you do, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Monday morning sun hadn't yet burned through the industrial haze hanging over Orion Motors' main facility when Lauren Hale stepped out of her black Audi, heels clicking against asphalt with the precision of a metronome. She moved like someone who'd never questioned her right to occupy space. Shoulders back, chin level, eyes that swept over her domain with the detached assessment of a general surveying conquered territory. At 38, Lauren had built Orion Motors from a struggling regional manufacturer into a national player. The automotive industry press called her the Iron CEO. Her employees called her other things, but never within earshot. She'd earned her reputation through ruthless efficiency, zero tolerance for deviation from protocol, and an almost pathological obsession with the company's public image. In Lauren's world, perception wasn't just reality. It was the only thing that mattered. She bypassed the executive entrance, heading instead toward the maintenance workshop. Her assistant, Marcus, hurried to keep pace, his tablet glowing with the morning's agenda. "Ms. Hale, the shareholders' meeting is at 9. We should really—" "This won't take long," Lauren interrupted, her voice carrying the flat certainty of someone whose decisions were never questioned. "I want to handle this personally." Marcus knew better than to argue. He'd worked for Lauren for 3 years, long enough to recognize the particular set of her jaw that meant someone's professional life was about to end. He'd seen it before. The marketing director who'd missed a deadline, the VP who'd challenged her in front of the board, the production manager who'd suggested they prioritize worker safety over quarterly projections. Lauren Hale didn't just fire people, she made examples of them. The workshop floor sprawled before them like a mechanical cathedral. High ceilings crisscrossed with ventilation ducts, rows of vehicle lifts, the smell of motor oil and industrial cleaner thick in the air. 52 technicians worked the morning shift, and every one of them looked up as Lauren entered. The usual cacophony of pneumatic tools and Spanish radio gradually died into uneasy silence. Lauren's heels announced her progress across the concrete floor. She'd dressed for this. A charcoal suit that cost more than most of these men earned in a month. Hair pulled back so severely it looked painful. She wanted them to see the distance between her world and theirs. "Where is he?" she asked Tom Whitmore, the workshop supervisor. Tom was 63, a weathered man with oil under his fingernails and the resigned expression of someone who'd chosen job security over dignity too many times to count. "Bay 17, Ms. Hale. But maybe we could discuss this in the—" "Bay 17, Lauren repeated, already moving. Tom exchanged glances with Marcus, and something passed between them, a mutual recognition that they were about to witness something ugly, and neither had the power to stop it. Ethan Cole was under a 2019 Silverado when Lauren arrived, only his legs visible beneath the chassis. She could hear him working, the methodical clink of tools, the quiet concentration of someone lost in their task. It irritated her immediately. How dare he be so calm when she'd come to destroy him? "Ethan Cole," her voice echoed off the concrete. "Get out from under that vehicle, now!" The sounds beneath the truck stopped. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then a creeper rolled out, and Ethan emerged into the fluorescent light. He was 41, though he looked older, the kind of weathered that comes from hard years rather than hard living. His coveralls were stained with fresh grease, and there was a smudge of motor oil across his left cheekbone. His hair, dark brown shot through with premature gray, was matted with sweat. But it was his eyes that struck observers, a pale gray that seemed almost colorless in the harsh light, eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine and had learned to keep those things locked away. He stood slowly, methodically, wiping his hands on a rag with the same deliberate care he seemed to apply to everything. He didn't speak, didn't ask what she wanted, just waited with the infinite patience of someone who'd learned that words rarely improved bad situations. "Do you know why I'm here?" Lauren asked. "I expect you'll tell me, ma'am." His voice was quiet, level, with the faint drawl of someone who'd grown up somewhere south of here but had spent years training it out. "Saturday, the Henderson account. Do you remember what you did?" Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I repaired Mr. Henderson's transmission." "You used unauthorized parts," Lauren said, her voice rising just enough to carry across the suddenly silent workshop. "You bypassed our approved vendor list. You made modifications that weren't in the service order. You made this company look unprofessional in front of a client who spends 6 figures with us annually." "The approved parts would have failed within a month," Ethan said quietly. "Mr. Henderson drives that truck hard. Construction work, heavy loads. The standard replacement wouldn't have held up. I sourced a commercial-grade component that will last 5 times longer." "That's not your decision to make." Lauren's composure cracked, just for a moment. "We have protocols, Cole. We have approved procedures. You don't get to play Maverick just because you think you know better." "I do know better, ma'am. Respectfully." There was no challenge in his tone, just a statement of fact that somehow made it worse. Lauren felt her face flush. Around them, the workshop had become a theater, 52 men pretending to work while absorbing every word. This was exactly what she'd come for, a public demonstration of what happened when anyone at Orion Motors thought they were above the rules. "Mr. Henderson called me personally," Lauren continued, her voice regaining its icy control. "Do you know what he said? He said our mechanic had argued with him about parts, that he'd been made to feel like he didn't understand his own vehicle, that the whole experience was unprofessional and presumptuous." Ethan's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those gray eyes. Not anger, but something deeper. Disappointment, maybe? Or just the weary recognition that truth didn't matter, only perception did. "I explained the technical reasoning," Ethan said. "Mr. Henderson approved the work. He signed off on everything. After you bullied him into it." Lauren stepped closer, invading his space with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never had to fear physical confrontation. "After you made him feel stupid for not understanding your precious technical expertise. Do you have any idea what that does to our reputation? What it costs us?" "More than the cost of repairing his transmission again in 6 weeks when the standard part fails?" Ethan asked, and for the first time there was an edge in his voice. The workshop collectively held its breath. Lauren smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "You're fired, Mr. Cole. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. You have 15 minutes to collect your personal belongings." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Ethan didn't react. Not with shock, not with anger, not with the pleading desperation Lauren had secretly hoped to see. He just nodded once, a tiny movement that might have been acknowledgement or might have been something else entirely. "Understood," he said quietly. "That's it?" Lauren felt cheated somehow. She'd expected resistance, justification, something she could demolish with the full force of her authority. "No arguments? No excuses?" "Would it change anything, ma'am?" The question, delivered without malice or sarcasm, somehow cut deeper than any argument could have. Lauren felt her face flush again, this time with something that might have been shame if she'd allowed herself to recognize it. "Get him out of here," she told Tom without looking at the supervisor. "And make sure everyone understands. This is what happens when you decide company policy doesn't apply to you." She turned and walked away, heels clicking their decisive rhythm, leaving Ethan standing in the wreckage of his employment, while 52 pairs of eyes watched him with expressions ranging from sympathy to relief that it wasn't them. The thing no one understood about Ethan Cole, the thing Lauren Hale would never have believed even if someone had tried to tell her, was that losing his job at Orion Motors wasn't about ego or pride or professional identity. It was about a 6-year-old girl named Mia who was home right now with a babysitter, trying to breathe through lungs that didn't work the way they should, waiting for her daddy to come home with the medicine that kept her alive. Ethan moved through the workshop in a daze, gathering his tools with the same methodical precision he applied to everything. His hands knew the routine. The 10 millimeter sockets went here, the torque wrenches there, the diagnostic tablet in its padded case. He'd bought these tools himself over 15 years, back when he'd first learned to turn wrenches in another life, in another world, before Mia and before everything changed. "Ethan," Tom appeared at his elbow, voice low. "Man, I'm sorry. I tried to talk her out of it, but it's all right, Tom." Ethan didn't look up from his toolbox. "You got a family to feed. I understand. The Henderson thing. You were right about those parts. I looked at the spec sheets. That standard transmission would have been back here in a month. Doesn't matter now." "It matters." Tom glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "Look, I got a buddy runs an independent shop over in Riverside. I could make a call, see if—" "I appreciate it." Ethan closed the toolbox with a soft click. "But I need something closer to home. Mia's appointments are 3 times a week now, and—" His voice caught, just for a second, before he pushed it back down where feelings belonged. "I need to be nearby." Tom nodded, understanding everything Ethan wasn't saying. Everyone in the workshop knew about Mia, the sweet little girl with her father's gray eyes who sometimes visited the shop, sitting quietly in the break room with her coloring books while Ethan finished a repair. They knew she was sick, though Ethan never discussed details. They knew he worked extra shifts whenever they were offered. They knew he never complained, never made excuses, never asked for special treatment, even when maybe he should have. "If there's anything I can do," Tom said helplessly. "There's not." Ethan hoisted his toolbox, surprised as always by its weight. 15 years of tools, each one a memory, each one now just dead weight he'd have to carry out of another place that didn't want him. "But thank you for being decent about it." The walk to his truck felt longer than it should have. Past the break room where he'd eaten 1,000 lunches alone, past the time clock where he'd punched in every morning at 6:30 for 3 years, past the loading dock where he'd sometimes stood during his 15-minute breaks, smoking cigarettes he'd quit 5 years ago, and staring at nothing while trying not to think about everything. His truck was a 1998 Ford F-150, older than some of the technicians he'd worked with. Held together by skill and stubbornness and prayers to a God Ethan wasn't sure he believed in anymore. He loaded his toolbox into the bed, then stood there for a moment with his hands on the tailgate, trying to figure out how he was going to explain this to Mia. "Daddy lost his job because he did the right thing. Daddy can't afford your medicine because he tried to help someone. Daddy failed you because he couldn't keep his mouth shut and just follow the rules like everyone else." His phone buzzed, a text from Rosa, Mia's babysitter. "She's having a rough morning. Use the inhaler twice. Should I call the doctor?" Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The doctor would want to see her. That would mean a copay he couldn't afford now, plus whatever additional treatments they recommended. His insurance through Orion had been decent. Not great, but enough to keep them afloat. That was gone now. He had 30 days of COBRA coverage, if he could somehow afford the premiums, which he couldn't. "I'm on my way home," he typed back. "Keep her calm. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He climbed into the truck and sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, trying to organize the chaos in his head into something resembling a plan. He had maybe $4,000 in savings. Money he'd been scraping together for 3 years, $1 here, $5 there, the pathetic accumulation of a man trying to build a safety net out of pocket change. That would cover maybe 2 months of Mia's medications if he was careful, longer if he skipped meals, shorter if anything else went wrong. After that? He didn't let himself think about after that. The truck started on the 3rd try, engine coughing like it had emphysema, and Ethan pulled out of the Orion Motors parking lot for the last time, watching it disappear in his rearview mirror. He didn't see Lauren watching from her office window 7 stories up, phone pressed to her ear, already moving on to the next crisis, the next decision, the next person whose life existed only as a line item in her operational spreadsheet. He didn't see Tom standing in the workshop doorway, shaking his head slowly as the old Ford vanished down the industrial road. He didn't see the young technician named Carlos whisper to his buddy, "That's bullshit, man. Colt was the best mechanic we had." Ethan Cole just drove, trying to figure out how to tell his 6-year-old daughter that everything was about to get so much harder, and he didn't have any good answers for why. The apartment was in the kind of neighborhood where people kept their heads down and their doors locked, where the police showed up 3 times a week for domestic disturbances and nobody ever saw anything. Ethan had lived there for 4 years, ever since Mia's mother had walked out, unable to handle the reality of a sick child and a husband who'd left his career to become a full-time caregiver. He couldn't blame Sarah. Not really. She'd married a Navy pilot with a bright future, not a broken man obsessed with keeping his daughter alive at the expense of everything else. She'd tried, for a while, but eventually the weight of medical bills and sleepless nights and a future that looked increasingly bleak had crushed whatever love had brought them together. She'd left on a Tuesday morning while Mia was in the hospital, left a note on the kitchen counter explaining she couldn't do it anymore, and Ethan had read it once, folded it carefully, and never looked at it again. That was 3 years ago. He hadn't heard from her since, except for the divorce papers that arrived 6 months later, which he'd signed without reading because what did it matter? She was already gone. They were already alone. The apartment building was a 3-story walk-up with paint peeling like sunburned skin. Ethan climbed the stairs 2 at a time, his toolbox suddenly forgotten in the truck. His entire focus narrowed to the door at the end of the second-floor hallway with the faded wreath that Mia had made last Christmas. He heard the coughing before he reached the door, wet, rattling coughs that made his stomach clench with familiar terror. He burst through, dropping his keys, and found Rosa sitting on the couch with Mia curled against her side, small body shaking with each breath. "Daddy!" Mia's face lit up despite the obvious struggle to breathe, and Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides, scooping her up with the gentle precision of someone who'd done this 10,000 times, who knew exactly how to hold her so she could breathe easier, who could read her symptoms like a diagnostic readout. "Hey, princess," he murmured against her hair. "Rough morning, huh?" She nodded, unable to speak, and Ethan felt her tiny heart hammering against his chest like a trapped bird. He looked at Rosa, who'd stood up, gathering her bag with the apologetic efficiency of someone who knew she wasn't needed anymore. "She's been like this since about 8, Rosa said quietly. "The inhaler helps, but not as much as it should. She might need—" "I know." Ethan's voice was gentle but final. "Thank you, Rosa. Same time tomorrow?" Rosa hesitated, and Ethan saw the question in her eyes, whether he could still afford her now that he'd lost his job. He'd have to tell her eventually, but not now, not with Mia struggling in his arms. "Same time," Rosa confirmed, and slipped out with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd learned not to intrude on private struggles. Ethan carried Mia to the couch, settling her against his chest, one hand rubbing slow circles on her back, while he reached for the nebulizer machine that lived on the coffee table. The routine was automatic now. Fill the cup with the prescribed amount of albuterol, attach the mask, turn on the compressor. The machine hissed to life, filling the small apartment with its familiar white noise. "Deep breaths, princess," Ethan murmured. "In through your nose, out through your mouth, just like we practiced." Mia nodded, her small hands clutching his shirt while the medication mist filled her lungs. After a few minutes, her breathing started to ease, the terrible rattling gradually smoothing into something closer to normal. Ethan felt the tension in his own chest begin to unwind, though he knew it was temporary. This was just managing symptoms, not solving problems. The real problem was the medication in the cabinet that cost $600 per refill, and they were down to their last bottle. "You're home early," Mia said when she could finally speak, her voice small and careful behind the nebulizer mask. "Did you finish all your work?" Ethan's throat tightened. She was 6 years old, and she'd learned to read him with the uncanny accuracy of children who've had to grow up too fast. She knew something was wrong, even if she couldn't articulate it. "Something like that," he said, keeping his voice light. "Thought we could spend the afternoon together. Maybe watch that movie you like. The one with the singing animals?" Mia's eyes brightened, though she was still too focused on breathing to fully smile. "Can we have popcorn?" "If you finish this treatment and your numbers look good, absolutely." They sat together in silence, father and daughter, while the nebulizer hissed and traffic noise drifted through the thin walls. Ethan's mind was already racing ahead, cataloging options, calculating timelines. He needed a job immediately, not in a week, not tomorrow, but today. Something that paid enough to cover rent, utilities, food, and most importantly, Mia's medications. Something with health insurance, though he knew the waiting period would probably be 90 days, which meant 3 months of paying out of pocket for everything. His phone was on the coffee table, and he stared at it like it might spontaneously offer solutions. He could call some of his old Navy buddies, see if anyone knew of job openings. He could hit up the independent shops in the area, see if anyone needed a mechanic willing to work cheap. He couldn't let himself finish that thought. Couldn't let himself consider the possibility that there might not be a solution this time, that his safety net of $4,000 might not be enough, that he might have to choose between rent and medication, between food and treatment, between keeping them off the streets and keeping Mia alive. "Daddy?" Mia's small voice cut through his spiral. "Why are you sad?" Ethan forced a smile, the same practiced expression he'd been perfecting for 6 years. "I'm not sad, Princess. I'm right here with you. That's the opposite of sad." She studied him with those two knowing gray eyes, and for a moment Ethan saw himself reflected back, the worry, the exhaustion, the desperate determination to protect her from the full weight of their reality. "Okay," she said finally, though they both knew she didn't quite believe him. "Can we watch the movie now?" "Yeah." Ethan removed the nebulizer mask gently, checking her breathing, noting the slight improvement. "Let me get you some water first, okay? You need to stay hydrated." He stood, moving to the kitchen that was really just a corner of the living room with a sink and a half-sized refrigerator. While he filled a glass with tap water, filtered through a pitcher because the pipes in this building leached lead, he allowed himself exactly 10 seconds to feel the full weight of his situation. 10 seconds to acknowledge that he had no job, no prospects, no safety net, and a daughter who needed constant, expensive medical care to survive. 10 seconds to feel the crushing pressure of responsibility, the suffocating fear that he might fail her, that all his sacrifice and suffering might not be enough. 10 seconds to stand at the sink with his head bowed and his hands gripping the counter while his whole body shook with the effort of not falling apart. Then time was up, and he took a deep breath, forced his shoulders back, and carried the water to his daughter with a smile that looked almost real. They were halfway through the movie, something about a koala putting on a singing competition, when Ethan's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him hit accept. "Is this Ethan Cole?" The voice was crisp, professional, with the particular cadence of someone used to being obeyed. "Speaking?" "Mr. Cole, this is Commander Patricia Morrison with the Naval Air Systems Command. I apologize for the intrusion, but we have a situation that requires your specific expertise. Are you able to speak privately?" Ethan glanced at Mia, who was absorbed in the movie, and carefully extricated himself, stepping into the small bedroom that doubled as his office, storage room, and escape from a living room that never felt big enough. "I haven't been active duty in 6 years, Commander," Ethan said quietly. "I don't think I can help you." "Actually, you're the only person who can help us. We have a missing pilot, Mr. Cole. Captain Jennifer Martinez went down somewhere in the Angeles National Forest during a training exercise 3 days ago. The emergency locator transmitter failed, her last known coordinates were compromised by equipment malfunction, and we've had aerial and ground teams searching 70 square miles without success. We're running out of time, and Captain Martinez is running out of options." Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle over him like a physical thing. "I still don't understand what this has to do with me." "Your file says you completed 63 successful search and rescue operations during your active service. You have an almost supernatural ability to predict pilot behavior under extreme stress. You can read terrain and weather patterns in ways that our computer models can't replicate. People in your unit used to say you could think like a downed pilot because you'd been one yourself." "That was a long time ago. The skill doesn't disappear, Mr. Cole. The way you see things doesn't change just because you're not wearing the uniform anymore." Morrison's voice softened slightly. "We need you. Captain Martinez has a husband and 2 children who need her to come home. We've exhausted our protocols, and we're reaching out to retired specialists with relevant experience. Your name was at the top of the list." Ethan leaned against the wall, mind already working despite himself. Angeles National Forest. Training exercise. Equipment failure. He could picture it. The terrain, the weather patterns this time of year, the likely flight path. the decision-making process of a pilot whose systems were failing. "I have a daughter," Ethan said finally. "She's sick. I can't leave her for—" "We don't need you to deploy to the search area. We just need you to look at the data we have and tell us where we should be looking. An hour of your time, maybe 2. We'll send a car to pick you up, bring you to the command center, and have you home before dinner. We'll compensate you for your time and—" Morrison paused. "I understand you recently experienced employment difficulties. Let's call this a consultation fee. $5,000 for reviewing our data and providing your assessment." $5,000. More than he'd saved in 3 years. Enough to buy him time, enough to keep Mia's medications current while he found another job. "I don't have anyone to watch my daughter," Ethan said, though he could already feel himself agreeing. "She can't be left alone." "Bring her. We'll have childcare available. Mr. Cole, I wouldn't ask if we had any other options. Captain Martinez has been down for 72 hours. If we don't find her in the next 24, the chances of recovery drop to almost 0. Ethan thought about Sarah, who'd left because she couldn't handle the pressure. He thought about Lauren Hale, who'd fired him for caring too much about doing things right. He thought about all the ways his life had narrowed down to this small apartment, this sick daughter, this constant struggle just to survive another day. But underneath all of that, buried under 6 years of exhaustion and compromise and desperate pragmatism, there was still the man who'd once pulled 3 pilots from burning wreckage, the man who'd understood that some responsibilities transcended self-interest, the man who'd believed that skill and knowledge carried obligations you couldn't just walk away from. "I'll do it," Ethan heard himself say. "When do you need me?" "A helicopter will be at the industrial park near your location in 90 minutes. Look for the clearing behind the abandoned warehouse on Industrial Boulevard." "And Mr. Cole?" "Thank you. You might just save a life today." The call ended, and Ethan stood in the small bedroom staring at his phone, trying to figure out how to explain to Mia that they were about to take a helicopter ride to help find a lost pilot, trying to reconcile the man he'd been with the man he'd become, trying to understand how his life had somehow circled back to the one place he'd thought he'd left behind forever. From the living room, Mia called out, "Daddy, you're missing the best part." "Coming, Princess," Ethan called back and walked back into the room where his daughter waited, where the singing animals danced across the screen, where for just a little while longer he could pretend that everything was simple and safe and under control. But in the back of his mind, he was already in the forest, already reading terrain, already thinking like a pilot whose systems had failed and whose time was running out. Some skills didn't fade. Some responsibilities didn't end just because you tried to walk away. And somewhere in the Angeles National Forest, a woman named Jennifer Martinez was waiting for someone to find her before the darkness became permanent. 90 minutes until the helicopter arrived. 90 minutes to become someone he'd left behind 6 years ago, even if it was just for an afternoon. 90 minutes until everything changed. The helicopter touched down exactly 90 minutes later, its rotors churning up dust and debris from the abandoned industrial lot like a mechanical storm. Ethan stood at the edge of the clearing with Mia tucked against his side, one hand shielding her eyes from the flying grit, the other holding the small backpack that contained her inhaler, her medications, and the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2. Mia's grip on his hand was tight enough to hurt, her small body trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement that Ethan recognized from every doctor's appointment, every hospital visit, every moment when the world became too big and too overwhelming for a 6-year-old who spent most of her life in a 50-square-foot apartment. "It's okay, Princess," he murmured against her hair, though his own heart was hammering in a way that had nothing to do with the helicopter and everything to do with the life he'd tried to leave behind. "It's just a ride, like an adventure." "A loud adventure," Mia said, but there was wonder in her voice now, the fear giving way to the resilient curiosity that never failed to break Ethan's heart. She was so brave, his daughter, braver than he'd ever been. The pilot emerged from the helicopter, a woman in her mid-30s with close-cropped dark hair and the efficient movements of someone who'd logged thousands of flight hours. She approached with her hand extended, her voice barely audible over the dying whine of the rotors. "Mr. Cole? Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Commander Morrison asked me to bring you to the command center." Her eyes dropped to Mia, and something in her expression softened. "And you must be the co-pilot." Mia looked up at Ethan, uncertain, and he squeezed her hand gently. "That's you, Princess. What do you say? Thank you for the ride, ma'am, Mia said with the careful politeness Ethan had drilled into her, the manners that were supposed to make up for the fact that they lived in a neighborhood where police sirens were white noise and the elevator never worked. Lieutenant Chen smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Let's get you both aboard. We've got a flight seat that'll fit you perfectly, and I bet you've never seen the city from up high before. The interior of the helicopter was cramped but meticulously maintained, the smell of aviation fuel and electronics familiar in a way that made Ethan's chest tighten with memories he'd spent 6 years trying to forget. Chen helped Mia into a flight seat, adjusting the harness with gentle precision while Ethan strapped himself in beside her. First time in a helicopter? Chen asked Mia while running through her pre-flight checklist. Mia nodded, eyes wide, momentarily forgetting her usual shyness in the face of something so far outside her normal experience. Well, you picked a good day for it. Visibility's perfect, winds are calm, and we've got about a 30-minute flight to the command center. You let me know if you need anything, okay? The rotor spooled up again, that distinctive whop, whop, whop that Ethan had once heard in his sleep. And then they were lifting, the industrial park falling away beneath them as Los Angeles spread out in all directions like a circuit board made of concrete and glass and desperate dreams. Mia pressed her face against the window, breath fogging the plexiglass, and Ethan watched her watching the world shrink beneath them. For a moment, he let himself forget about the missing pilot, the job he'd lost, the medications running low in their bathroom cabinet. For a moment, he just watched his daughter discover wonder, and it was enough. Mr. Cole? Chen's voice crackled through the headset. Commander Morrison briefed me on your background. Search and rescue, 63 successful operations. That's an impressive record. That was a different life, Ethan said, his own voice sounding strange through the headset speakers. Respectfully, sir, skills like yours don't just disappear. They're part of who you are. Chen banked the helicopter smoothly, adjusting their heading. Captain Martinez has 2 kids, 8 and 10. They're at the command center right now with their father, waiting for news, waiting for someone to bring their mom home. Ethan didn't respond, but his jaw tightened. Chen was playing him, using his empathy as leverage, and the worst part was that it was working. He knew what those kids were feeling right now. He'd lived it himself, watching his own father disappear into operational deployments, never quite sure if this would be the time Dad didn't come home. I'll do what I can, he said finally, but I've been out for 6 years. I don't have access to current tactical doctrine, current search patterns, current anything. I'm not sure how much help I'll actually be. Commander Morrison seems to think you're exactly what we need. And from what I've heard about your record, when you told people where to look, they found what they were searching for. The command center turned out to be a converted warehouse in Burbank, its exterior deliberately nondescript, its interior a maze of communication equipment, satellite displays, and tactical maps that covered every wall. Personnel moved with the controlled urgency of people working against a ticking clock, voices crisp and professional even as the underlying tension was thick enough to taste. Commander Patricia Morrison was waiting when they landed, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd commanded respect long before she'd earned the rank that demanded it. She shook Ethan's hand with a grip that said she didn't waste time with gentle pleasantries. Mr. Cole, thank you for coming, and this must be Mia. She crouched down to Mia's eye level with surprising grace. We've got a room set up with movies and games and snacks. My assistant's daughter is about your age, and she left some of her favorite books here. Would you like to see? Mia looked up at Ethan, and he nodded. It's okay, princess. I'll be right in the next room, and if you need anything, you just ask for me, okay? A young petty officer appeared as if summoned, offered Mia his hand with a gentle smile, and led her toward a side room that had been hastily converted into a child-friendly space. Ethan watched her go with the familiar anxiety of a parent who'd learned that the world was full of dangers his protection couldn't always prevent. She'll be safe here, Morrison said quietly. I give you my word. Thank you, Commander. This way. We don't have much time, so I'll brief you while you review what we've got. The tactical room was dominated by a large digital display showing a topographical map of the Angeles National Forest, marked with color-coded zones indicating search areas already covered. Red pins marked Captain Martinez's last known position, likely flight path, and the ever-expanding radius where she could potentially be. Captain Jennifer Martinez, call sign Phoenix, experienced pilot with 800 flight hours, Morrison began, calling up a personnel file on a side screen. The photo showed a woman in her late 30s with warm brown eyes and an easy smile. She was flying a routine training sortie 3 days ago, testing new navigation equipment. At 14:47 local time, she reported equipment malfunction. At 14:51, she declared an emergency. At 14:53, we lost all contact. Emergency locator transmitter? Ethan asked, already studying the map, his mind automatically cataloging terrain features, weather patterns, likely pilot decisions. Failed to activate. The equipment malfunction cascaded faster than anyone anticipated. We have her last known coordinates, but the margin of error is significant given the navigation system failure. We've searched a 70 square mile area with aerial assets, ground teams, and every piece of technology we have. Nothing. Ethan moved closer to the display, his finger tracing potential flight paths. What was the nature of the equipment malfunction? Navigation system failure, followed by partial electrical failure. She would have been flying manually with limited instrumentation. Weather conditions at the time? Clear skies, light winds, excellent visibility. So she would have been able to see terrain, orient herself visually. Ethan's mind was working now, falling into patterns he'd thought he'd forgotten. Training sortie means she was following a predetermined route. Do you have the flight plan? Morrison pulled up another screen showing the planned route. Ethan studied it in silence, his eyes moving between the flight plan and the topographical map, making connections, eliminating possibilities, building a picture of what Captain Martinez would have been thinking as her systems failed. She was 31 minutes into a 45-minute flight when things went wrong, Ethan said slowly. Close enough to base that she might have considered trying to limp home, but with failing systems, the safer choice would have been to find a landing spot immediately. That's what our analysts concluded, but we've searched every possible landing area within her range. You've searched where computer models said she could reach. Ethan tapped the display. But pilots don't think like computer models. We think in terms of survivability, visibility, and what we can see with our own eyes when the instruments stop working. He zoomed in on a section of the map that showed a series of valleys running northeast. What's the prevailing wind direction at altitude in this area? Southwest to northeast. So if she lost power or needed to glide, the wind would have pushed her this direction. His finger traced a path that diverged from the search areas. Your computer models probably calculated maximum glide range based on optimal conditions, but an experienced pilot fighting failing systems isn't thinking about optimal. She's thinking about survivable. Morrison leaned forward, studying where Ethan was pointing. That area is outside our primary search radius. The terrain analysis suggested it was too rugged, too forested, not enough clear areas for an emergency landing, which is exactly why she might have gone there. Ethan zoomed in further, the display showing a narrow valley with a creek running through it. Look at this. Water source, natural clearing along the creek bed, southern exposure for warmth and visibility. If I'm a pilot with failing systems, I'm not looking for a perfect landing zone. I'm looking for survivable terrain with resources for the aftermath. We don't have any signals from that area. No emergency beacon, no radio contact, nothing. Because her transmitter failed and her radio was compromised, but that doesn't mean she's not there. Ethan straightened, meeting Morrison's eyes. Commander, with respect, you've been searching where the technology said she should be. I'm telling you where a pilot would actually go. Morrison studied him for a long moment, then turned to one of her officers. Lieutenant Rodriguez, redirect Falcon team to these coordinates. Full search pattern, visual and thermal. Ma'am, that's going to pull them out of the primary. Do it. If Mr. Cole is wrong, we've lost a few hours. If he's right, we found our pilot. The next 40 minutes were an exercise in controlled tension. Ethan stood in front of the display, making small adjustments to search coordinates, explaining the logic behind each decision to Morrison and her team. He felt himself slipping back into the mindset he'd left behind. The calm certainty that came from trusting his training, his instincts, his understanding of how pilots thought when everything went wrong. Behind them, personnel monitored communications, tracked the redirected search team's progress, updated the displays in real time. The room hummed with purposeful activity, and Ethan was peripherally aware of people watching him, evaluating him, trying to reconcile the man in grease-stained jeans with the tactical analyst whose suggestions were shifting an entire search operation. Falcon Lead has reached the new search area, Rodriguez reported, beginning visual sweep of the valley. Everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath. Ethan kept his eyes on the display, watching the blue icons representing the search team move through the terrain he'd identified. He was either right, and they were about to find Captain Martinez, or he was wrong, and he just wasted precious hours and undermined whatever credibility Morrison had given him. 10 minutes passed. 15. The tension in the room ratcheted up with each passing minute. Ethan felt sweat collecting at the small of his back, his hands clenched at his sides. He'd been so certain, but certainty didn't mean anything if... Falcon Lead to command. The voice crackled through the speakers with barely contained excitement. We have visual confirmation. I repeat, we have visual confirmation. Located one pilot, alive, responsive, waving from a creek bed at the following coordinates. The command center erupted, not with cheers or celebration, but with the immediate mobilization of rescue protocols. Medical teams alerted, extraction helicopter dispatched, communication with ground units coordinated with split-second precision. Morrison was already moving, issuing orders, but she paused long enough to grip Ethan's shoulder. You found her, Mr. Cole. You brought her home. Ethan couldn't speak. He just nodded, feeling something tight in his chest finally release. Somewhere in that forest, a woman named Jennifer Martinez was going to see her children again. Somewhere, a husband was about to get the call that his wife was safe. Somewhere, 2 kids were about to learn that their mother was coming home. The extraction team is en route, Rodriguez reported. Captain Martinez is ambulatory but dehydrated. Preliminary assessment suggests she'll make a full recovery. Morrison turned to Ethan. We need to debrief you, document your methodology. What you just did, reading that terrain, predicting her behavior, that's not something we can easily replicate with computer models. The Navy could use someone with your particular skill set on a consulting basis. Commander, I appreciate that, but I have a daughter who needs... I know about your daughter, Mr. Cole, and I know you just lost your job at Orion Motors. Morrison's expression was sympathetic but direct. What I'm offering is contract work. Flexible hours, work from home when possible, consultation fees well above what you were making as a mechanic. We have pilots go down, we have training accidents, we have scenarios where human insight beats algorithmic prediction. You'd be saving lives and you'd be able to provide for your daughter. Ethan opened his mouth to refuse, to explain that he'd left this world behind for good reasons, that he couldn't go back to being the person who lived in crisis and emergency and constant high-stakes decisions. But then he thought about Mia in the next room, about the medications they needed, about the $4,000 that wasn't enough, and the future that looked increasingly impossible. I need to think about it, he said finally. Fair enough, but think fast. We'll have the consultation fee transferred to your account tonight, $5,000 as promised. And Mr. Cole, what you did today mattered. That's worth something. Before Ethan could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance. He turned to see a man in his early 40s burst into the command center, followed by 2 children, a boy and a girl with their mother's eyes, and Lieutenant Chen trying to maintain some semblance of order. Where is she? The man demanded, his voice cracking. They said you found her. Where is my wife? Morrison moved to intercept him, her voice calm and authoritative. Mr. Martinez, I'm Commander Morrison. Your wife has been located alive and responsive. The extraction team will have her here within the hour. The man's legs seemed to give out, and he sank into a nearby chair, covering his face with his hands, while his children clung to him. The girl was crying, the boy trying to be brave and failing. Ethan watched them, saw the moment relief crash through terror, saw the way they held each other like people who'd been drowning and had finally found air. Who found her? Mr. Martinez asked, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. I need to know who brought my wife back. Morrison hesitated, then gestured toward Ethan. This is Ethan Cole. He's a former Navy search and rescue specialist who helped us locate your wife. Mr. Martinez stood, crossed the room, and before Ethan could react, pulled him into a fierce embrace. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking. Thank you for bringing her home. Ethan stood rigid, uncomfortable with the gratitude, uncomfortable with the attention, uncomfortable with the reminder that his skills he'd tried to bury, could still matter in ways that went beyond paying bills and surviving another month. I just looked at a map, Ethan said awkwardly. Your wife is the one who survived 3 days in the wilderness. She's the hero here. You found her when no one else could. Mr. Martinez pulled back, gripping Ethan's shoulders. My kids still have their mother because of you. That's not nothing. The children were watching now, the girl wiping her eyes, the boy studying Ethan with open curiosity. They were 8 and 10, Morrison had said. The same age as Ethan had been when his own father had deployed to places that couldn't be named, doing things that couldn't be discussed, coming home changed in ways a child couldn't understand. Your mom is tough, Ethan told them, crouching down to their eye level. And she's smart. She knew exactly what to do to stay alive until help arrived. You should be really proud of her. The girl nodded, sniffling, while the boy asked, Are you a soldier? I used to be. Now I'm a dad, just like your dad. That's the most important job there is. It was the right thing to say. The children relaxed slightly, Mr. Martinez's grip on his shoulder eased, and the moment passed into something less intense, less overwhelming. Morrison began explaining the extraction timeline, and Ethan used the distraction to slip away, heading toward the room where Mia waited. He found her curled up in an oversized chair, one of the promised books open in her lap, but her eyes were closed and her breathing had the shallow quality that meant she was struggling again. Rosa's words came back to him. She's having a rough morning, and he realized with a spike of guilt that in the chaos of finding Captain Martinez, he'd forgotten to monitor Mia's condition. Princess? He knelt beside the chair, pressing his hand to her forehead, warm but not feverish. How are you feeling? Mia's eyes fluttered open. Tired, Daddy, and my chest hurts. I know, baby. Let's get you home, okay? We'll do a treatment as soon as we're back. Did you find the lost lady? Mia asked as Ethan gathered her into his arms, her weight so insubstantial it terrified him every time he picked her up. Yeah, Princess. We found her. She's going to be okay. Because of you? Because a lot of people work together. That's how good things happen. People helping each other. It was a nice sentiment, Ethan thought, as he carried his daughter through the command center toward the waiting helicopter. People helping each other. What a luxury, to believe that was how the world actually worked, instead of the truth he'd learned through hard experience, that people helped themselves, and if you were lucky, you didn't get crushed in the process. The flight back was quieter than the flight out. Mia dozing against his shoulder while Chen navigated through the afternoon traffic patterns. The city sprawled beneath them, 8 million people living 8 million separate struggles. And Ethan wondered how many of them had lost their jobs today. How many had sick children they couldn't afford to treat. How many were holding on by their fingernails while the world told them to just work harder, be smarter, sacrifice more. His phone buzzed. A notification from his bank. Deposit received, $5,000, $100. $5,000. Enough to breathe for a while. Enough to refill Mia's prescriptions and pay rent and buy groceries without having to choose between them. But also a reminder that he'd earned it by being the person he'd tried to stop being. The tactical analyst, the search specialist, the man whose value was measured in his ability to predict crisis and engineer solutions to other people's emergencies. Mr. Cole? Chen's voice came through the headset. Commander Morrison asked me to give you her direct number. She meant what she said about contract work. The Navy needs people like you. People like me, Ethan repeated, tasting the words. What did that even mean? People who could think like pilots in distress? People who could read terrain and weather and human behavior and synthesize it all into actionable intelligence? People who'd sacrificed everything for a career that eventually sacrificed them right back? People who can save lives, Chen clarified. That's not a common skill set, sir. The helicopter touched down in the same industrial lot where they'd started, dust swirling in the rotor wash, late afternoon sun turning everything golden and surreal. Ethan thanked Chen for the ride, adjusted Mia in his arms, and walked back to his truck feeling like he'd lived 3 days in the space of 6 hours. He got Mia home and settled on the couch with her nebulizer, the familiar hiss of the machine filling the apartment with its medical white noise. While she breathed medication into her struggling lungs, Ethan stood at the kitchen sink and stared at his phone, at Commander Morrison's contact information, at the choice that was somehow both impossible and inevitable. Go back to the world he'd left behind, use the skills he'd tried to bury, except that he was useful in ways that went beyond turning wrenches and diagnosing transmission problems. Or keep running, keep hiding, keep pretending he was just a mechanic, just a father, just a man trying to survive in the margins while his particular talents rusted from disuse. "Daddy?" Mia's voice was clearer now, the medication working its temporary magic. "Are you going to help find more lost people?" Ethan turned to look at his daughter, at the way she watched him with those two knowing eyes, at the inhaler in her small hand, and the medical equipment that defined their lives. "I don't know, Princess. Maybe. Would that be okay with you?" Mia considered this with the seriousness of someone whose world had been reduced to survival calculations at an age when she should have been worried about playground politics and which Disney princess was the best. "If you help people," she said finally, "then maybe people will help us too. That's how it works, right?" It wasn't how it worked. The world didn't operate on karma or cosmic balance or the just distribution of assistance to those who'd earned it through good deeds. The world operated on power and money and who could afford to pay for the help they needed. But Mia believed in fairness, still believed that good behavior was rewarded and kindness was reciprocated, and Ethan wasn't ready to take that away from her. "Yeah, Princess," he said softly. "That's how it works." His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Cole, this is Tom Whitmore from Orion. Heard what happened today through the Veteran Network. We need to talk. The shop needs you back." Ethan stared at the message, then deleted it without responding. Tom was a good man trapped in a bad system, doing what he could within constraints that crushed integrity at every turn. But going back to Orion would mean working for Lauren Hale again, and that was something Ethan couldn't stomach even for $5,000 in consultation fees. Another buzz. Another message. This one from an unknown sender. "Your heroics today are trending on military social media. Video of the helicopter landing at your location is getting shared. People are asking questions. Thought you should know." Anonymous. Ethan's stomach dropped. He pulled up his social media apps, which he barely used, and found exactly what the anonymous message had warned him about. Video footage of the Navy helicopter landing in the industrial lot, grainy cell phone recordings from neighboring businesses, speculation about what Navy asset had been deployed to a civilian location, wild theories about secret operations and classified emergencies. And in the comments, slowly but inexorably, people were starting to connect dots. Someone had recognized the industrial area near Orion Motors. Someone else had mentioned a mechanic being fired that same morning. A third person, claiming to be a former Navy aviation specialist, had identified the helicopter as a search and rescue asset and speculated about what kind of emergency would require that particular response. The story was assembling itself in real time, scattered across platforms, building momentum like a storm system that hadn't quite formed but whose pressure signatures were unmistakable to anyone who knew how to read them. Ethan closed the apps and set his phone face down on the counter, trying to contain the rising panic. He'd spent 6 years being nobody, being invisible, being just another struggling single father in a city full of people barely holding on. Anonymity had been his shield, his protection, his escape from a past that wanted to claim him. And now that shield was cracking, the story was spreading, and tomorrow or the next day or the next week, someone was going to put all the pieces together and broadcast to the world that the mechanic Lauren Hale had fired was actually a decorated Navy veteran whose expertise had just saved a pilot's life. The irony was almost funny. Almost. "Daddy, your phone keeps buzzing," Mia observed from the couch. "I know, Princess. Just some work stuff. Nothing important." But it was important, and they both knew it. Everything was about to change, and Ethan could feel it coming like a pilot feels turbulence before the instruments register it. A fundamental shift in pressure, a warning that the smooth flight was over and the real test was just beginning. The story broke at 6:43 the next morning while Ethan was measuring out Mia's medications, his hands moving through the familiar routine with the autopilot precision of someone who'd done this exact task 2,000 times. He didn't hear his phone exploding with notifications in the other room. didn't see the news vans that were already positioning themselves outside his apartment building, didn't know that his face, captured in grainy cell phone footage from yesterday's helicopter landing, was currently being broadcast across every local news station in Southern California. He found out when Rosa arrived for her morning shift and nearly dropped her bag in shock. "Ethan, have you seen—" She stopped herself, glancing at Mia, who was eating cereal at the tiny kitchen table, then lowered her voice to an urgent whisper. "There are reporters downstairs, like a lot of reporters. They're asking about you." Ethan's hand froze mid-pour, medication splashing over the edge of the dosage cup. "What are you talking about?" Rosa pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking slightly as she navigated to a news site. The headline blazed across the screen in bold type: "Fired mechanic revealed as Navy hero who saved missing pilot." Below it, a photo of Ethan from his active duty days. Younger, harder, wearing his flight suit with the insignia that marked him as someone who'd earned respect through skill and sacrifice, rather than having it granted by title. "They're calling you the Ghost," Rosa said, still whispering. "Apparently that was your call sign? The article says you completed more successful search and rescue operations than anyone in your unit, that you left under mysterious circumstances, that you've been hiding in plain sight for 6 years. Ethan took the phone with numb fingers, scanning the article with growing horror. It had everything. His service record, carefully worded to avoid classified details, but containing enough specifics to paint a picture of someone far more capable than a grease-stained mechanic. His departure from active duty, described as voluntary separation under unclear circumstances. His current employment status, including the detail that he'd been fired from Orion Motors the very day the Navy had called him for consultation. And there, buried in the third paragraph, the detail that made his blood run cold. Sources indicate Cole left military service to care for his young daughter, who suffers from a chronic respiratory condition requiring constant medical attention. The single father has struggled financially since his transition to civilian life, working as an automotive technician to afford his daughter's medications. "They know about Mia," Ethan said, his voice hollow. "They put her in the story." "I'm sorry," Rosa whispered. "I didn't know if I should tell you, but you need to know what's happening. Ethan, they're framing you as this heroic figure who sacrificed everything for his child, who got treated like garbage by his employer, and then turned around and saved someone's life anyway. People are furious about how Orion Motors treated you." Ethan looked at Mia, who was still eating her cereal, oblivious to the fact that her privacy, her medical condition, her entire existence had just been broadcast to strangers who would consume her story like entertainment and then move on to the next viral sensation. "Daddy?" Mia looked up, sensing his distress with that uncanny awareness sick children developed. "Is something wrong?" "No, Princess. Everything's fine." The lie tasted like ash. "Rosa's going to stay with you today, okay? I need to take care of some things." "You're not going to work?" "Not today. Today's a special day." Mia accepted this with a small nod, returning to her cereal while Ethan's world continued its controlled demolition. His phone was ringing now. He could hear it from the bedroom, a continuous barrage of incoming calls that felt like an assault. He retrieved it with the grim fatalism of someone checking the extent of damage after a crash. 43 missed calls, 67 text messages. His voicemail was full. The notifications kept coming, a digital avalanche that showed no signs of stopping. Most were from reporters requesting interviews. Some were from old Navy colleagues he hadn't spoken to in years, messages ranging from congratulations to concern to barely concealed resentment. There were 3 from Tom Whitmore, each more urgent than the last, 2 from Commander Morrison, and 1, time-stamped at 6:15 this morning, from a number he didn't recognize but whose area code placed it somewhere in Orion Motors' executive offices. That last message simply read, "We need to talk. Urgent. LH. Lauren Hale." The woman who'd fired him 36 hours ago was now reaching out as if they had any basis for conversation beyond the professional destruction she'd inflicted with such casual cruelty. Ethan deleted the message without responding and was about to put his phone away when it rang in his hand. Commander Morrison. He stepped into the bathroom, the only place in the apartment where he could have a conversation without Mia overhearing, and accepted the call. Mr. Cole, I apologize for the media situation. Morrison's voice was tight with controlled anger. Someone leaked information to the press. We're conducting an internal investigation, but the damage is done. I need you to know that the Navy did not authorize the release of your service record or personal details. But they're accurate, Ethan said flatly. Everything in that article is true. That doesn't make it right. Your privacy has been violated, and there will be consequences for whoever was responsible. In the meantime, I'm calling to offer you protection if you need it. The Navy takes care of its own, even former personnel. Protection from what? Reporters asking questions? Protection from the attention that comes with being a viral story. Mr. Cole, you're trending on every social media platform. The video of Captain Martinez's rescue is being shared millions of times. People are calling for Orion Motors to face consequences for firing you. This isn't just local news anymore. This is national. Ethan leaned against the bathroom sink, studying his reflection in the mirror. He looked like a man who'd aged a decade overnight, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. I didn't ask for any of this. I know, but it's happening anyway, and you need to decide how you're going to handle it. You can hide from it, which will be nearly impossible given the media presence at your location. You can try to ride it out and hope it dies down, which it will eventually, but not before causing significant disruption to your life. Or you can control the narrative before someone else does it for you. Control the narrative, Ethan repeated, tasting the corporate speak that made his skin crawl. You mean do interviews, tell my story, perform for the cameras? I mean protect yourself and your daughter by making sure the story that gets told is accurate. Right now you're a symbol, the noble veteran screwed over by corporate greed. But symbols get distorted, Mr. Cole. They get used by people with agendas. Better to speak for yourself than let others speak for you. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to think past the exhaustion and shock. Morrison was right. He knew that much. But the thought of putting himself out there, of turning his and Mia's private struggles into public consumption, made something in him recoil with visceral disgust. I need time, he said finally. You don't have time. By this afternoon, someone else will be telling your story whether you participate or not. I'm offering you a chance to shape how that story gets told. The Navy will support you, provide media training if needed, help you navigate this. But you need to decide now. Before Ethan could respond, he heard Rosa's voice from the other room, sharp with alarm. Sir, you can't just come in here. Sir! Ethan ended the call and burst out of the bathroom to find Tom Whitmore standing in his living room, looking sheepish and determined in equal measure. Rosa had positioned herself between Tom and Mia, who'd abandoned her cereal to watch this new development with wide, uncertain eyes. Tom, what the hell? I'm sorry, Ethan. I know I shouldn't just show up, but you weren't answering your phone, and this couldn't wait. Tom's eyes swept the small apartment, taking in the medical equipment, the medications lined up on the counter, the threadbare furniture and peeling wallpaper that spoke to years of barely scraping by. Something in his expression shifted. Not quite pity, but recognition of a reality he'd known existed but hadn't truly understood until now. You need to leave, Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. You have no right to be here. I know, but Ethan, you need to hear this. The board met an emergency session this morning. Ms. Hale is being removed as CEO effective immediately. They're offering you your job back with full back pay, benefits retroactive to your termination date, and a formal public apology. The words hung in the air like something physical. Rosa gasped softly. Mia, sensing the adult tension but not understanding it, had gone very still. Ethan just stared at Tom, trying to process information that didn't make sense. They're firing Lauren because she fired me, Ethan finally managed. They're removing her because the board is facing a public relations catastrophe, and someone needs to take the fall. The story isn't just about you, Ethan. It's about her record of cold leadership, her focus on image over substance, the other people she's fired or pushed out over the years. You were just the match that lit the fuse, but the powder keg was already there. So this is damage control. They don't actually care about what happened to me. They just need to contain the fallout. Tom had the grace to look uncomfortable. That's part of it, yeah. But it's also an opportunity for you. They're offering a significant promotion, Ethan. Shop supervisor position, full benefits, salary increase of 40%. You'd have authority over operations, the ability to implement the kind of technical standards you've always advocated for. And all I have to do is let them use me to rehabilitate their public image. All you have to do is take a job that will let you afford proper care for your daughter." Tom's voice softened. "I know how this looks. I know it's motivated by self-interest on their part. But Ethan, the medical benefits alone would change your life. Mia could see specialists, get treatments that aren't covered by basic plans. You could stop choosing between rent and medications." Ethan looked at Mia, who was still watching with those two perceptive eyes. She didn't know what was being discussed, but she knew it involved her, knew it was somehow about the constant calculations that governed their lives. Can we afford this? Do we have enough for that? What happens if the medicine runs out before the next paycheck? "I need you to leave," Ethan repeated. "I need to think." They need an answer by noon. After that, the offer expires and they move forward with their crisis management plan without you. Tom pulled a business card from his pocket, set it on the counter next to Mia's medications. "That's the board chairman's direct line. Whatever you decide, Ethan, I hope you know that some of us always recognized what you brought to that shop. I'm sorry it took a media firestorm for the people at the top to see it." Tom left, closing the door quietly behind him. Rosa immediately moved to lock it, her hands still shaking. Ethan stood frozen in the middle of his living room, surrounded by the detritus of a life that had been barely functional and was now completely unraveling. "Daddy?" Mia's small voice cut through the chaos. "Are you going back to work?" "I don't know, Princess. But if you go back, I can get better medicine? That's what the man said." Ethan's throat tightened. She'd understood more than he'd realized, had been piecing together the adult conversation with the scary accuracy of a child who'd learned to translate euphemisms into their brutal truths. Better medicine meant expensive medicine. Specialists meant doctors who could actually help instead of just managing symptoms. A future where she might breathe easily meant a father who swallowed his pride and accepted help from people whose motivations were entirely selfish. "It's more complicated than that," Ethan started, but Mia was already nodding with the weary wisdom of someone far older than 6. Grown-ups always say that when they mean yes, but they don't want to. Before Ethan could formulate a response that wasn't a lie, his phone rang again. Different number, local area code, but something about it triggered recognition even before he answered. He knew who this was before the voice on the other end confirmed it. "Mr. Cole, this is Lauren Hale." The sound of her voice in his apartment, in the space where he'd held his daughter through countless medical crises while this woman had never spared a thought for his existence, beyond his utility to her quarterly projections, made rage rise in Ethan's chest with such force he had to consciously control his breathing. "I have nothing to say to you. Please, just listen. I'm calling from my personal phone, not as a representative of Orion Motors. I'm no longer with the company as of this morning. I heard corporate sacrifice to appease public outrage. How's it feel to be the one fired?" The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Ethan thought she might have hung up. When Lauren spoke again, her voice had lost its characteristic certainty, replaced by something that might have been genuine remorse if Ethan had been willing to give her that much credit. "You have every right to be angry with me. What I did was wrong, and no public relations crisis or board decision changes that. I fired you to make a point, to demonstrate my authority without considering who you were as a person or what the consequences might be for you and your daughter. That was cruel, and I'm sorry. You're sorry because it blew up in your face. You're sorry because you're facing consequences for the first time in your corporate career. Don't insult me by pretending this is about genuine remorse." "You're right, partially right anyway." Lauren's voice wavered. "But Mr. Cole, Ethan, I'm also calling because I need you to understand something. When I fired you, I didn't know about your daughter's condition. I didn't know about your service record. I didn't know anything about you except what I saw in that moment, someone I perceived as challenging my authority. That's not an excuse, it's an indictment. You destroyed someone's livelihood without knowing anything about their circumstances." "I know, and I have to live with that." A pause, then. "They're offering you my job, aren't they? Not the CEO position, but a leadership role with real authority?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's none of your business. I'm asking because if you take it, you'll be in my position. You'll have power over people's livelihoods, authority to make decisions that impact their lives in ways you might not fully understand in the moment." And I'm calling to tell you something I wish someone had told me years ago. That power isn't worth anything if it makes you forget that everyone you manage is a person with their own struggles, their own fears, their own daughter waiting at home. The words landed with unexpected weight. Ethan found himself unable to immediately respond, his anger complicated by the uncomfortable recognition that Lauren was right. If he took the job, he would become what she'd been, someone with authority, someone who made decisions that cascaded through other people's lives, someone who could either remember where he came from or become just another executive treating workers as interchangeable assets. "Why are you telling me this?" Ethan finally asked. "Because I don't want you to become me. Because maybe if I can help you avoid my mistakes, some good can come from this disaster I created." Lauren's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And because your daughter deserves better than what I offered you. A father who maintains his integrity even when he has power, who remembers that compassion isn't weakness and understanding isn't inefficiency." The line went dead before Ethan could respond. He stood there holding his phone, trying to reconcile the woman who'd humiliated him in front of 50 witnesses with the person who'd just delivered what sounded like genuine advice born from genuine regret. "Was that the mean lady?" Mia asked from the couch, and Ethan realized she'd been listening to his half of the conversation, piecing together meaning from context the way she always did. "Yeah, princess, that was her. She sounded sad." People are complicated. Sometimes they do bad things and feel sad about it later. Does that make the bad things okay? No, but it means they're trying to be better. That counts for something. Mia considered this with the seriousness she applied to all moral questions, then returned to her cereal, which had gone soggy, but which she ate anyway because waste was something they couldn't afford. Ethan watched her, this tiny person who'd become his entire world, and tried to figure out what the right answer was. Take the job at Orion and give Mia access to better medical care, but compromise his principles by working for a company that only valued him after public pressure made it expedient. Refuse the job and maintain his integrity, but condemn his daughter to continued medical struggles because pride was apparently more important than her health. Accept Morrison's offer of contract work with the Navy, returning to a world he'd left for good reasons, but which at least represented honest work using skills he'd earned rather than sympathy he hadn't sought. His phone buzzed with another notification. This time it was a news alert. Orion Motors board meets with fired veteran. Sources say offer includes major promotion. They were already spinning the story, already positioning themselves as the benevolent corporation making amends, already using him whether he participated or not. "Rosa," Ethan said quietly, "I need to go out for a while. Can you stay with Mia?" "Of course, but Ethan, the reporter's downstairs." "I know. I'll deal with it." He changed into clean clothes, the nicest he owned, jeans without grease stains, a button-down shirt Mia had helped him pick out at Goodwill 2 years ago because Daddy should have something fancy for parent-teacher conferences. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and saw a man at a crossroads, except both paths looked like traps, and the third option was standing still until circumstances forced movement anyway. "Daddy!" Mia appeared in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Are you leaving because of me? Because I'm expensive?" The question hit Ethan like a physical blow. He dropped to his knees, pulling his daughter into a fierce embrace, feeling her tiny body against his and wondering how such a small person could contain so much awareness of adult failings. "You're not expensive, princess. You're priceless. And nothing that's happening right now is your fault. Do you understand? None of this is because of you. But if I wasn't sick, if you weren't sick, I'd still love you exactly the same. If you weren't sick, you'd still be the most important person in my whole world. The grown-ups are dealing with grown-up problems, and that's not your job to fix or worry about." Mia nodded against his shoulder, but Ethan knew she didn't really believe him. 6 years old and already convinced she was a burden, already internalizing the message that her existence complicated things, already learning to make herself smaller to ease the strain on a father who tried so hard to hide how close they were to the edge. "I'll be back soon," Ethan promised. "And when I come back, we'll figure everything out together. Deal?" "Deal." "But Daddy?" "Whatever you decide, I want you to be happy too, not just me." Ethan felt tears prick his eyes, but forced them back. He kissed his daughter's forehead, handed her back to Rosa's care, and walked out into the hallway where his life had become a public spectacle. The reporters were waiting at the bottom of the stairs, just as Rosa had warned. Cameras, microphones, people shouting questions over each other in a cacophony that felt like an assault. Ethan kept his head down, his expression neutral, his stride purposeful as he pushed through the crowd toward his truck. "Mr. Cole, how do you feel about being fired? Are you going to take legal action against Orion Motors? Is it true your daughter is seriously ill? What was it like finding Captain Martinez? Will you accept the job offer?" Ethan ignored them all, kept moving, reached his truck and climbed inside before anyone could block his path. He started the engine on the second try, pulled out of the parking lot with cameras still filming, and drove toward a destination he hadn't consciously chosen, but his hands seemed to know anyway. 20 minutes later, he stood in the parking lot of Orion Motors, staring up at the building where he'd worked for 3 years, where he'd been humiliated 2 days ago, where corporate leadership now waited to see if he'd accept their offer and participate in their redemption narrative. The security guard at the entrance recognized him immediately. "Mr. Cole, they're expecting you. Conference room 7, top floor." Ethan nodded, walked through the lobby where employees he'd worked beside for years stopped and stared, took the elevator up 7 floors while his reflection in the polished doors showed a man who looked simultaneously exhausted and absolutely certain. The conference room was all glass and expensive furniture, a space designed to intimidate and impress in equal measure. 5 board members sat along one side of a massive table, 3 men and 2 women, all wearing expressions of calculated concern that didn't quite reach their eyes. At the head of the table was Richard Chen, the board chairman, a man in his 60s who'd built his fortune in manufacturing before retiring into governance roles where he could exercise power without accountability. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming." Chen stood, offered his hand across the table. Ethan looked at it for a long moment before accepting, the handshake brief and perfunctory. "Please, sit. We have a great deal to discuss." "Actually, we don't." Ethan remained standing. "I came here to give you my answer in person, because you deserve at least that much courtesy, even if you never extended it to me." The board members exchanged glances, their practiced composure cracking slightly. Chen's smile became strained. "Mr. Cole, perhaps you'd like to hear the full details of our offer before—" "I don't need to hear the details. I understand what you're offering. Money, benefits, authority, all the things that would make my life easier and my daughter's care better. And I understand why you're offering it, to make yourselves look good, to demonstrate corporate responsibility, to turn a PR disaster into a redemption story." "That's a rather cynical interpretation," one of the female board members said. "It's an accurate interpretation, and here's my answer. I decline." The words dropped into the conference room like stones into still water. Chen's expression shifted from strained courtesy to barely concealed frustration. "Mr. Cole, I don't think you understand the opportunity we're offering. This isn't just about your previous position. We're talking about real leadership, real influence, compensation that would let me afford better care for my daughter, I know. Everyone keeps reminding me of that, as if I need to be convinced that money would solve problems. But here's what you're not understanding. I don't want to work for a company that only values people when it's convenient, that only offers support when it's profitable, that only demonstrates basic human decency when cameras are watching." "We made a mistake," Chen said, his voice hardening. "We're trying to correct it. You'd think someone in your position would show more gratitude." "Gratitude?" Ethan laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You want me to be grateful that you're offering to undo the harm you caused after the world forced you to care? No. I don't accept your offer, I don't accept your apology, and I don't accept the premise that any of this represents genuine change rather than strategic damage control." He turned to leave, but Chen's voice stopped him. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Cole. This offer expires today. Walk away now, and you'll regret it when your daughter needs treatments you can't afford." Ethan turned back slowly, and something in his expression made Chen lean back involuntarily. "Don't you ever use my daughter as leverage. Don't you dare suggest that my decision to maintain my integrity is somehow failing her. I've been making impossible choices to keep her alive since before you knew my name, and I'll continue making them long after this media circus moves on to the next story." "Then what will you do?" one of the other board members asked, Genuine curiosity breaking through the corporate facade. You need income, you need benefits, you need stability. Where will you find that if not here? I'll figure it out, the same way I've been figuring it out for 6 years. Ethan looked at each of them in turn. These people who made decisions from positions of power and insulation, who'd never had to choose between medicine and food, who'd never held a struggling child while knowing you couldn't afford the treatment that would help. I don't know if you can understand this, but some things matter more than money. Some principles aren't for sale, not even when the price is everything you need. He left then, walking out of the conference room while 5 board members sat in stunned silence, walking through the building where employees parted before him like he was something dangerous, walking out into the parking lot where the sun was high and brutal and he had no job, no prospects, and no regrets. His phone rang as he reached his truck. Commander Morrison, again. I heard about your meeting at Orion, she said without preamble. You turned them down. Word travels fast. Military networks are efficient. So here's what I'm offering, and I need you to listen before you refuse out of principle. Contract work with Navy Search and Rescue, flexible hours, work from home when possible, $2,500 per consultation with a guaranteed minimum of 4 consultations per month. Full health benefits for you and your daughter through Navy Family Services, backdated to today. This isn't charity, Mr. Cole. This is the Navy recognizing value and securing it before someone else does. Ethan leaned against his truck, feeling the metal warm through his shirt from the afternoon sun. Why are you doing this? Because you saved Captain Martinez's life, and that matters more than corporate politics or media narratives. Because your skills are exactly what we need, and you've proven you haven't lost your edge. And because, Morrison's voice softened slightly, because I have a daughter too, and I understand what it means to do whatever it takes to give them the life they deserve. I left the military for reasons that haven't changed. I know. You left because the work cost too much, because every mission took something from you that you couldn't spare while raising a child alone. But this isn't active deployment, Ethan. This is consultation from your home, analysis of data we send you, occasional trips for critical situations, but never without childcare support. You can use your skills without sacrificing your role as Mia's father. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the sun on his face and the weight of too many decisions pressing down on shoulders that had been carrying impossible loads for so long. Can I think about it? You can have 24 hours. After that, I need to present alternatives to my superiors. Morrison paused. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice at Orion. Working for people who only respect you under duress is a special kind of hell. The call ended, and Ethan drove home through traffic that felt surreal in its normalcy. People going about their lives, oblivious to the fact that his entire existence had been upended in the space of 48 hours. By the time he reached his building, the reporters had thinned out, moved on to other stories, or taken breaks to file their pieces before the evening news cycle. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step an effort, and found his apartment exactly as he'd left it. Rosa had put Mia down for a nap, the nebulizer machine quiet on the coffee table, the afternoon sun slanting through the thin curtains to paint everything in gold. How did it go? Rosa asked quietly. I turned them down. She nodded as if she'd expected nothing less. So what now? Now I figure out the next step. The same way I always do. Rosa gathered her things, squeezed his shoulder in a gesture of solidarity, and left him alone with his sleeping daughter and his uncertain future. Ethan stood in the center of his small living room, surrounded by evidence of their struggling life, and realized that for the first time in 6 years, he felt something approaching peace. He'd refused to be used. He'd maintained his integrity. He'd made a choice that prioritized principle over pragmatism, even when pragmatism would have solved immediate problems. Whether that made him brave or foolish, he didn't yet know. But watching Mia sleep, her breathing slightly labored but steady, he thought maybe it didn't matter. Maybe what mattered was that when she was old enough to understand, she'd know her father had chosen dignity over desperation, had refused to compromise his values even when the price was everything they needed. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new impossible choices between competing necessities. But tonight, in this moment, Ethan Cole was a man who'd said no to power, and there was a strange freedom in that refusal, a lightness he hadn't felt since before everything had gone wrong. His phone buzzed one final time. A text from an unknown number. The pharmacy where you usually fill Mia's prescriptions called. An anonymous donor has paid off your account balance and set up a prepaid fund for the next 6 months of medications. They said to tell you that some people help not because they expect anything in return, but because it's the right thing to do. Ethan read the message 3 times, trying to comprehend what it meant, trying to figure out who would have done this. And then he remembered Mia's words from earlier. If you help people, then maybe people will help us too. Maybe she'd been right after all. Maybe the world did occasionally operate on something other than power and self-interest. Maybe sometimes, just sometimes, kindness was its own reward and integrity found its own support. He didn't cry, but it was close. Instead, he sat on his couch beside his sleeping daughter, placed one hand gently on her small back to feel the rise and fall of her breathing, and let himself believe just for a moment that everything might actually turn out okay. The anonymous donation bought them something Ethan hadn't had in years. Breathing room. Not just for Mia, whose medications were now secure for 6 months, but for Ethan himself, who could finally think beyond the next paycheck, the next crisis, the next impossible calculation between competing necessities. He spent that night researching Commander Morrison's offer with the kind of careful attention he'd once applied to pre-flight checks, examining every angle, every potential complication, every way this could either save them or complicate their lives in new and unexpected ways. By morning, he'd made his decision. He called Morrison at 7:30 before Mia woke up, before the day could accumulate enough momentum to change his mind. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the early hour. "Mr. Cole, I was hoping to hear from you." "I'll take the contract work," Ethan said without preamble. "But I have conditions." "I'm listening." "Jake, first, no deployments longer than 48 hours without at least 2 weeks' notice. Mia has medical appointments 3 times a week, and I need to be able to arrange backup care. Second, all work that can be done remotely gets done remotely. I'll come to the command center when necessary, but my baseline is working from home. Third, if I say I need to step back because of a medical emergency with my daughter, that gets respected without question or penalty." Morrison was quiet for a moment, and Ethan could almost hear her weighing his demands against institutional flexibility, personal sympathy against operational requirements. "Those are reasonable conditions," she finally said. "I can't guarantee we won't occasionally need you on short notice for critical situations, but I can guarantee that your role as Mia's father takes priority. We're not asking you to choose between your daughter and this work, Ethan. We're asking you to do both." "Then we have an agreement." "Good. I'll have contracts drawn up by this afternoon. In the meantime, I'm sending over some preliminary files, 3 cold cases that our analysts have been struggling with. Search scenarios where we never found the pilot or found them too late. I want your fresh perspective, no pressure, just see if anything jumps out at you." "Cold cases," Ethan repeated, feeling something tighten in his chest. "People we couldn't save. People we couldn't find. But maybe you can help us learn from those failures so we do better next time. That's what this is about, Ethan. Not just reactive crisis response, but improving our system so fewer pilots end up lost in the first place." After the call ended, Ethan sat in his small kitchen with coffee going cold in his hands, trying to reconcile the life he'd built, narrow, contained, focused entirely on survival, with the life that was opening before him. A life where his skills mattered again, where he could make a difference, where the knowledge he'd earned through hard experience could save lives instead of just diagnosing transmission problems. It was terrifying. It was also, he had to admit, exhilarating in a way he hadn't felt since Mia was born, and he'd held her tiny body and sworn he'd protect her from everything, even if it meant sacrificing every other part of himself. "Daddy?" Mia's voice drifted from the bedroom, still thick with sleep. "Is it morning?" "Yeah, princess, it's morning." Ethan stood, moved to the bedroom doorway where his daughter was sitting up in bed, her hair a tangled mess, her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. "How are you feeling?" "Okay, my chest doesn't hurt as much today." "That's good. That's really good." Ethan crossed the room, pressed his hand to her forehead in the automatic gesture of a parent who'd learned to read symptoms like instruments. Normal temperature, breathing that sounded clearer than yesterday. Small victories. "How about we have a special breakfast this morning? Pancakes? Mia's eyes lit up. Pancakes were a luxury reserved for good days, days when they could afford the extra ingredients and the extra time. With chocolate chips? If that's what you want, then absolutely with chocolate chips. They spent the morning in the kind of domestic peace Ethan had learned to treasure, mixing batter, flipping pancakes that weren't quite round, laughing when chocolate chips escaped to burn on the griddle. Mia sat at their small table, legs swinging, telling him elaborate stories about her stuffed rabbit's adventures, while Ethan pretended the rabbit's exploits were the most fascinating thing he'd ever heard. This was why he'd left the Navy. This was what mattered more than career, more than recognition, more than the adrenaline rush of successful rescues and solved puzzles. These quiet moments with his daughter, these ordinary miracles of childhood that happened every day for millions of families, but which felt impossibly precious when you knew how fragile they were. His phone buzzed with an incoming email. The files Morrison had promised, 3 PDF documents with innocuous titles that belied their tragic contents. Ethan hesitated, then opened the first one while Mia finished her pancakes. Lieutenant James Morrison, lost during a training exercise in the Sierra Nevada mountains 14 months ago. Last known position compromised by equipment failure. Search, conducted for 9 days before being called off. Body never recovered. Survived by a wife and infant son. The file contained weather data, topographical maps, communication transcripts from Morrison's final transmissions, analysis of probable flight paths based on fuel consumption and last known vectors. Ethan scanned through it with professional detachment, his mind automatically processing information, eliminating impossibilities, constructing scenarios. There, a detail the analyst had noted but apparently hadn't weighted heavily enough. Morrison's final transmission mentioned visual landmarks, specifically a rock formation that looks like a cathedral. The analysts had tried to match this to known geological features along his presumed flight path and found nothing conclusive. But they'd assumed Morrison was describing something he was currently seeing, not something he'd seen moments before losing visual reference. If you backed up the timeline, adjusted for velocity, and the disorientation that came with system failures, that cathedral rock would place Morrison's last visual fix 3 miles northwest of where searches had concentrated. Different drainage pattern, different terrain profile, different everything. Ethan pulled up satellite imagery, overlaid it with the topographical data, traced probable paths from the adjusted position. There, a narrow ravine that would have been invisible from aerial searches, its entrance obscured by tree cover, its depth sufficient to shield wreckage from thermal imaging unless you knew exactly where to look. He drafted an email to Morrison, attaching his analysis with the caveat that this was speculation based on limited information and 14 months of environmental changes. But if they wanted to conduct one more search, if the family wanted closure, this was where he'd look. "Daddy, you're doing your thinking face," Mia observed from her position at the table, chocolate smeared around her mouth. "Just work stuff, princess. Nothing important." "Is it about lost people?" Ethan looked at his daughter, at the way she watched him with those knowing eyes, and decided she deserved honesty. "Yeah, a pilot who got lost a long time ago. I'm trying to help find him so his family can know what happened." "That's sad." "It is. But maybe we can make it a little less sad by giving them answers." Mia nodded solemnly, processed this with her usual gravity, then asked, "Can I have more pancakes?" The moment passed, ordinary domesticity reasserting itself, and Ethan was grateful for it. This was the balance he needed to find. The ability to engage with tragedy professionally without letting it consume the spaces where his daughter lived. She deserved a father who could be present, not one who was always mentally 3 miles northwest, searching ravines for ghosts. His phone rang. Morrison, calling instead of responding by email. "You found him," she said without preamble. "Or at least you found where we should look. I just sent a team to the coordinates you provided." "Ethan, how long did that take you? 20 minutes?" 30, Ethan corrected. "And I might be wrong." It's educated guessing based on the kind of intuitive analysis that our best computer models can't replicate. "I'm starting to understand why your unit called you Ghost. You see things other people miss." I just paid attention to what the pilot was telling us in his final transmission. Everyone else heard generic descriptions. I heard specific landmarks processed through the kind of disorientation that comes with system failures. Whatever you call it, it's exactly what we need. The other two files I sent, when you have time, same analysis. No rush, but I'm curious what you see that we missed. After Morrison hung up, Ethan sat with his phone in his hand, staring at nothing while his mind raced ahead to implications he hadn't fully considered. If he was right about Lieutenant Morrison's location, if they found him in that ravine, it would mean closure for a family that had been living in limbo for 14 months. It would also mean confirmation that his analytical approach worked, that his value to the Navy was real and substantial, that this contract work could become something more permanent if he let it. The question was whether he wanted it to, whether he was ready to step back into a world he'd left behind even in this limited capacity, whether he could maintain the boundaries he'd set, protecting his time with Mia, preserving their small domestic peace, while engaging with work that demanded his best thinking and his deepest empathy. "Daddy, you're thinking again," Mia said, her voice patient but pointed. "Sorry, Princess, I'm done now. What do you want to do today? Can we go to the park? I feel good enough for the park." Ethan studied her carefully, noting the color in her cheeks, the ease of her breathing, the energy in her posture that had been missing for weeks. "Yeah, I think we can do that. But if you start feeling tired, I'll tell you right away. I promise." They spent the afternoon at the small neighborhood park 3 blocks from their apartment, Mia playing on equipment that had seen better decades while Ethan watched from a bench, ready to intervene at the first sign of respiratory distress. But she seemed genuinely better today, laughing as she navigated the rusty slide, waving at him from the top of the climbing structure. Briefly just a kid doing kid things without the weight of chronic illness defining every moment. Other parents were there, watching their own children with varying degrees of attention. Ethan recognized some of them from previous park visits. The young mother with twins who always looked exhausted, the grandfather who brought his grandson every Tuesday and Thursday, the father who worked from his phone while his daughter played alone. Today, several of them were watching Ethan with poorly concealed interest. The story had been in the news, his face recognizable now from the photos that had circulated. He could feel their curiosity, their questions, their desire to approach him and ask about the helicopter, the rescue, the firing, the dramatic revelation of his hidden past. He kept his eyes on Mia, his posture closed, his message clear. "Leave us alone." Eventually they did, their interest waning in the face of his obvious unwillingness to engage. This was what his life would be like for a while. Recognition from strangers, unsolicited attention, the uncomfortable celebrity that came from being a viral story. It would fade, he knew. Some new drama would capture public imagination. Some new hero would emerge, and he'd return to blessed anonymity. Until then, he'd endure it the way he endured everything else. With patience, with focus on what mattered, with the understanding that discomfort was temporary, but Mia's childhood was happening now, and he wouldn't let media attention steal these ordinary precious moments. His phone buzzed. A text from Tom Whitmore. "Heard you turned down the board's offer. Can't say I'm surprised. For what it's worth, half the shop walked out this morning in protest. They're forming a union, using your firing as the catalyst. Things are changing at Orion, whether the board likes it or not." Ethan read the message twice, trying to process the information. He hadn't intended to start a labor movement. He just refused to let his principles be bought. But apparently his decision had resonated with people who'd been swallowing their own compromises for years, who'd watched management treat workers as disposable and had finally found a catalyst for collective action. Another text, this time from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Cole, this is Jennifer Martinez. They told me you found me, that you're the reason I'm alive. I don't have adequate words to thank you. My family and I would like to meet you if you're willing. No pressure, no media, just a mother who wants to thank the person who brought her home." Ethan stared at the message, feeling emotion rise in his throat. He'd known abstractly that finding Captain Martinez mattered, that it had consequences beyond the immediate rescue. But seeing it stated so plainly, "You're the reason I'm alive," made it real in a way that numbers and operational reports never could. He typed back carefully. "I'm glad you made it home. I don't need thanks, just knowing you're with your family is enough. But if meeting would give you peace, I'm willing." The response came immediately. "Tomorrow? I'm still at the Naval Hospital for observation, but they're allowing visitors. 2 p.m. if that works. I'll be there. Daddy, look! Mia called from the swings, pumping her legs with determination, going higher than Ethan was comfortable with, but not high enough to justify ruining her joy with his anxiety. I'm flying! I see you, princess. You're doing great. He watched her swing, this small, brave person who faced more adversity in her 6 years than most people encountered in a lifetime, and felt gratitude so intense it was almost painful. Gratitude that she was here, that she was laughing, that she was having a good day despite everything. Gratitude that the anonymous donation had removed the immediate pressure of medication costs. Gratitude that Morrison's contract would provide stability and benefits while respecting his primary role as Mia's father. And underneath it all, complicated and uncomfortable, gratitude that Lauren Hale had fired him. Because if she hadn't, none of this would have happened. He'd still be just another mechanic going through the motions, his skills wasting away, his connection to purpose eroded by years of simply surviving. The firing had been cruel and unjust, but it had also been the catalyst that brought him back to work that mattered, that reminded him he was more than his current circumstances, that showed him a path forward that didn't require sacrificing either his integrity or his daughter's well-being. The universe had a strange sense of irony, he thought. Sometimes the worst things that happened contained the seeds of better things, if you were willing to look past the immediate pain to see the possibilities. Daddy, I'm tired now, Mia called from the swings, her voice already breathier than it had been an hour ago. Can we go home? Ethan was there in seconds, helping her down, checking her breathing, noting the slight wheeze that had returned. Of course, princess. You did so good today. I'm proud of you. They walked home slowly, Mia's hand in his, her steps still steady, but lacking the energy she'd had earlier. By the time they reached the apartment, she was ready for her nebulizer treatment, settling into their routine with the practiced ease of someone who had done this thousands of times. While the machine hissed and Mia watched cartoons through the breathing mask, Ethan opened the second cold case file Morrison had sent. Captain Sarah Chen, lost during a weather emergency 2 years ago. Last known position over the Pacific Ocean, no body recovered. Search called off after 6 days. No surviving family except an elderly mother who'd spent 2 years demanding answers that no one could provide. This one was harder. Ocean searches were different from mountain searches. No landmarks, no terrain to read, currents and tides that moved evidence in unpredictable patterns. But Ethan studied the meteorological data from the day of Chen's disappearance, traced wind patterns and ocean currents, calculated drift based on probable debris configurations. There, a pattern in the search coordinates that suggested the analysts had underestimated how fast the storm system had been moving. If you adjusted for the accelerated wind speeds in the upper atmosphere versus surface measurements, Chen's debris field would have drifted 15 miles further south than searches had covered. It was probably too late now, 2 years of ocean drift and degradation. But if the mother wanted closure, if she needed to know someone had tried one more time, this was where Ethan would look. He drafted another email to Morrison, his second analysis of the day, and wondered if this was what his life would become. Solving puzzles that brought closure to families who'd lived too long with uncertainty. It was meaningful work, important work. It was also work that required him to sit with tragedy, to immerse himself in the final moments of people who hadn't made it home, to calculate probabilities that usually ended with too late or not enough. Could he do this long-term without it eroding something essential? Could he maintain the emotional boundaries necessary to protect Mia from the weight of what he was processing? Could he be both the analyst who studied death and the father who embodied life and hope and presence? Daddy, the treatment's done, Mia said, pulling off the nebulizer mask. Can we have dinner? Absolutely. What sounds good? Spaghetti with the red sauce and garlic bread. Coming right up, princess. He made dinner. They ate together at their small table. Mia told him more stories about her stuffed rabbit's adventures, while Ethan made appropriate responses and tried not to think about cold cases and lost pilots and families who'd never gotten their closure. This was compartmentalization, he knew. The ability to separate work from home life, tragedy from domesticity, the analytical mind from the nurturing heart. He'd learned it in the Navy, perfected it during the years when missions had gotten harder and losses had mounted. He'd thought he'd left that skill behind when he'd left active service, But apparently it was still there, still functional, still necessary for navigating a life that required him to hold multiple contradictory truths simultaneously. After dinner, after Mia's evening medications, after stories and teeth brushing and the bedtime routine that had become their anchor in an uncertain world, Ethan sat on the couch in the dark apartment and let himself feel everything he'd been containing all day. Relief that Mia had had a good day. Gratitude for the anonymous donation that had bought them time. Anxiety about tomorrow's meeting with Captain Martinez. Uncertainty about whether he'd made the right decision accepting Morrison's contract. Guilt that his skills that could save lives, had been dormant for 6 years while he'd changed oil and rotated tires. And underneath it all, a strange sense of possibility he hadn't felt since before everything went wrong. The sense that maybe, just maybe, he could have both things. Could be present for Mia while also doing work that mattered. Could provide for her needs while also maintaining his principles. Could rebuild something resembling a life instead of just surviving day to day. His phone lit up with a new message. Morrison again. Team reached the ravine at your coordinates. Found Lieutenant Morrison's aircraft. Body recovered. Family notified. You gave them closure they'd been waiting 14 months for. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you anyway. Ethan read the message 3 times, feeling something complicated unfold in his chest. A man was still dead. A wife was still widowed. A child would still grow up without his father. But now they knew what happened, could have a funeral, could begin whatever healing process followed confirmed loss instead of ambiguous absence. He'd done that. His analysis, his ability to read what others had missed, his willingness to engage with tragedy despite having every reason to avoid it, that had made a tangible difference in people's lives. It didn't fix everything. It didn't solve the fundamental challenges he and Mia faced, but it was something, and after 6 years of feeling like nothing he did mattered beyond immediate survival, something was more than he'd had yesterday. He checked on Mia one final time, found her sleeping peacefully with her stuffed rabbit clutched tight, her breathing steady enough that he could almost convince himself she was just a regular kid with regular problems, instead of a chronically ill child whose health was the axis around which their entire world rotated. Love you, princess, he whispered, adjusting her blanket even though she was already covered, just needing the small gesture of parental care that confirmed his role, his purpose, his reason for everything. Tomorrow he'd visit Captain Martinez. Tomorrow he'd continue analyzing cold cases. Tomorrow he'd navigate the continued media attention and the complicated aftermath of decisions that had cascaded far beyond their original scope. But tonight, in this moment, Ethan Cole was just a father watching his daughter sleep, and that was enough. The next morning arrived with the kind of perfect California weather that made everything feel possible. Clear skies, moderate temperature, the promise of a day where nothing would go catastrophically wrong. Ethan dressed carefully for the hospital visit, mindful that he'd be meeting not just Captain Martinez, but likely her family, possibly other Navy personnel, who'd want to thank him or assess him or both. Rosa arrived early, giving Ethan extra time to prepare. She'd been following the news coverage, understood without being told that this meeting mattered in ways that went beyond simple gratitude. You're nervous, she observed while Ethan checked his appearance in the bathroom mirror for the 3rd time. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's known you for 3 years. You hide it well. Rosa paused, then added, For what it's worth, I think what you did was incredible. Finding that pilot, refusing to compromise your principles with Orion, accepting work that uses your real skills, it's all incredibly brave. I don't feel brave. I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water and hoping I don't make any mistakes that hurt Mia. That's what being a parent is. The difference is you're also making decisions that might actually build something better instead of just treading water. That takes courage. Ethan wanted to believe her. He thanked Rosa, kissed Mia goodbye with promises to be back by dinner, and drove to the Naval Hospital with his stomach in knots. The hospital was a sprawling complex of modern buildings and military efficiency, all polished floors and professional staff who moved with purpose. Ethan checked in at the front desk, was given a visitor badge, and was escorted by a young petty officer to the wing where Captain Martinez was recovering. She's been asking about you all morning, the petty officer said as they walked. Pretty much everyone on the floor has heard about how you found her. You're kind of a celebrity around here. I'd rather not be. Too late for that, sir. What you did was extraordinary. They reached a private room at the end of a quiet corridor. The petty officer knocked softly, then opened the door to reveal a space that was part hospital room, part family gathering. Captain Jennifer Martinez was sitting up in bed, looking remarkably healthy for someone who'd spent 3 days lost in the wilderness. Her husband sat in a chair beside her, holding her hand. Their 2 children, the same boy and girl Ethan had seen at the command center, were sprawled on the floor playing with action figures. Everyone looked up as Ethan entered. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Captain Martinez smiled, and it transformed her entire face, made her look younger and lighter and like someone who'd been given back something precious they'd thought was lost forever. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice stronger than Ethan had expected. "Thank you for coming. Please call me Ethan, and I'm glad you're okay, really glad." "Because of you." Martinez's husband stood, crossed the room, and embraced Ethan with the same fierce gratitude he'd shown at the command center. "Because you saw what dozens of analysts and search teams couldn't see. Because you understood how my wife thinks, how pilots think, how someone would behave in those circumstances." "I just looked at the data," Ethan said awkwardly, uncomfortable with the praise but understanding they needed to give it. "Your wife is the one who survived. She's the one who made smart decisions that kept her alive until we found her." "Can you tell me what you saw?" Martinez asked from the bed. "I want to understand what made the difference between being found and being another statistic." Ethan pulled up a chair, aware of the family watching him, aware of the weight this conversation carried. "Your final transmission mentioned equipment failure cascading faster than expected. That told me you were dealing with multiple system compromises, which meant you'd prioritize survivability over optimal landing zones. The analysts were looking where computers said you could reach. I looked where a pilot would actually go when everything's failing and you just need to get down safely." "The Creek Valley," Martinez said, nodding. "I saw it, knew it wasn't perfect, but it was survivable. Water, southern exposure, relatively clear sightlines for potential rescue." "Exactly. And you protected your emergency supplies, managed your resources, stayed visible. You did everything right. But you're the one who told them where to look. The valley I chose was outside their primary search radius. If you hadn't adjusted their coordinates—" She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. They all understood the alternative. The children had stopped playing, were watching this exchange with the serious attention of kids who'd come too close to losing a parent and wanted to understand everything about how she'd come back. "Are you the one who found Mom?" the boy asked directly. "I helped people know where to look," Ethan said carefully. "A lot of people work together to bring your mom home." "But you're the one who figured it out," the girl pressed. "That's what everyone says." Ethan glanced at Martinez, seeking guidance on how to navigate this conversation. She nodded, giving him permission to be honest. "Yeah," he said finally. "I'm the one who figured out where to search. But your mom's the one who survived. She's the real hero here." "You have a little girl," the boy said, and Ethan wondered how they knew that, then remembered that his daughter had been part of the news coverage, her medical condition mentioned in articles he wished had left her out entirely. "Mom said you left the Navy to take care of her because she's sick." "That's right. Is she going to be okay?" The question hit Ethan in the chest with unexpected force. These children had almost lost their mother, were now asking him if his daughter would survive her illness, and the parallel was both obvious and unbearable. "I hope so," Ethan said, his voice rougher than intended. "She's very brave, and I'm doing everything I can to help her get better." "We hope she's okay too," the girl said with the simple sincerity of childhood. "Because you saved our mom, so your little girl should get to be okay." If only the universe worked that way, Ethan thought. If only good deeds were rewarded with cosmic justice. If only helping others guaranteed help in return. But he just nodded, accepted the child's blessing for what it was, an expression of hope in a world that too often denied it. They talked for another hour, Martinez describing her 3 days in the wilderness, her husband filling in the family's experience of waiting for news, the children gradually warming to Ethan and showing him drawings they'd made of helicopters and rescue teams. It was healing for them, Ethan realized. Having him there, being able to thank him directly, being able to close the loop on a trauma that could have destroyed them, but which they'd survived together. As Ethan prepared to leave, Martinez caught his hand. "Commander Morrison told me you're doing contract work now. Analyzing search scenarios, helping find people others have missed." "Starting to, yeah." "That's good. The Navy needs people like you. But Ethan, don't let it consume you the way active service did. You left for good reasons. Make sure this new arrangement respects those boundaries. I'm trying. Try harder. Your daughter needs you present, not just physically there, but actually present. I know that from experience. I've missed too many bedtimes, too many school events, too many ordinary moments because I was focused on the next mission, the next training exercise, the next thing that felt urgent but wasn't actually more important than my kids. She squeezed his hand. Don't make my mistakes. Find the balance, protect your time with her. Remember that being a good parent is harder and more important than being a good analyst. Ethan nodded, throat tight with emotion he couldn't quite name. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for bringing me home, for giving my family their mom back, for being willing to use your gifts even when it would have been easier to walk away. He left the hospital feeling like he'd undergone some sort of emotional surgery, cracked open, rearranged, stitched back together slightly different than before. The drive home passed in a blur of thoughts too complicated to untangle, feelings too big to process while navigating traffic. By the time he reached his apartment building, reporters had mostly disappeared, moved on to newer stories, or convinced that he wasn't going to give them the dramatic interviews they wanted. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than it should, and found Rosa and Mia playing cards at the kitchen table. "Daddy!" Mia launched herself at him, and he caught her automatically, holding her tight while she chattered about her day, about the game she and Rosa had been playing, about the cartoon she'd watched where animals could talk and had adventures. "Sounds like you had a good day, princess." "Did you have a good day? Did you help more lost people?" "I met the pilot I helped find. She's doing well. She has 2 kids about your age." "Did you tell them about me?" "They already knew about you. They said they hope you feel better soon." Mia processed this, then said with perfect childhood logic, "That's nice. I hope they're happy their mom came home." "They are, princess. They really are." That evening, after Rosa had left and dinner had been eaten and medications had been administered, Ethan sat with Mia while she drifted toward sleep, her small hand in his, her breathing steady and unlabored. "Daddy?" she murmured, already half asleep. "Are you happy now?" The question startled him. "What do you mean, princess?" "You seem different, less sad. I like it when you're not sad." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He'd thought he'd been hiding it well, the constant underlying anxiety and exhaustion that had defined their lives for years. But of course she'd noticed. Children always noticed. "I'm trying to be less sad," he said honestly. "Things are getting a little better, and that helps." "Good," Mia said, her words slurring with sleep. "You deserve to be happy too." He sat with her until she was fully asleep, then stood at the window of their small apartment, looking out at the city lights spreading to the horizon. Somewhere out there, Captain Martinez was with her family, alive because of decisions Ethan had made. Somewhere, Lieutenant Morrison's family finally had closure. Somewhere, the workers at Orion Motors were organizing for better treatment. Somewhere, things were changing in small ways that accumulated into something that might eventually resemble justice. And here, in this cramped apartment, with medical equipment scattered around and bills piled on the counter, a father and daughter were building something too. Not just surviving anymore, but actually living. Not just getting through each day, but occasionally having good days. Not just enduring, but hoping. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But standing there in the dark, listening to his daughter breathe peacefully in the next room, Ethan thought maybe it was enough. Maybe this fragile, complicated, occasionally beautiful life they were piecing together was actually worth all the struggle, all the sacrifice, all the impossible choices he'd made to get them here. His phone buzzed one last time. A message from an unknown number. "The anonymous donation was from me. You gave me my wife back. It's the least I could do. Take care of your daughter. She's lucky to have you. Martinez." Ethan read the message through tears he didn't bother to hide, gratitude and relief, and something approaching peace flooding through him in equal measure. The universe might not operate on cosmic justice, might not reward good deeds with guaranteed reciprocity. But sometimes, just sometimes, helping others did come back around. Sometimes kindness was repaid with kindness. Sometimes doing the right thing led to right things happening in return. Not always. Not even usually. But tonight, in this moment, it was enough to believe that maybe Mia had been right all along. Maybe that was how it worked, when you let it. 3 months later, Ethan stood in the kitchen of an apartment that was only slightly larger than the old one, but felt exponentially different. Natural light streamed through windows that actually opened. The paint on the walls was fresh and clean, and most importantly, Mia's new bedroom had space for both her bed and a small desk where she could draw and color without having to clear medical equipment first. The Navy's health benefits had kicked in 6 weeks ago, and the difference was already visible. New medications that actually controlled her symptoms instead of just managing them. Appointments with a pediatric pulmonologist who specialized in her condition. A treatment plan that focused on improvement rather than mere survival. She was sleeping better, breathing easier, playing longer at the park before exhaustion set in. Small improvements that accumulated into something that looked remarkably like a childhood instead of an extended medical crisis. Ethan finished loading the dishwasher, an actual dishwasher, not just a sink in his tired hands, and checked the time. He had 40 minutes before his next consultation call with Commander Morrison's team, enough time to review the preliminary data on a new case while Mia finished her homework at the kitchen table. "Daddy, how do you spell helicopter?" she called out, pencil poised over her worksheet. "Sound it out first, Princess. What do you think?" "H-E-L-I." She paused, scrunched up her face in concentration. "C-O-P-T-E-R? Perfect. You got it exactly right. Is that because we rode in one? It's easier to spell words when you've actually seen the thing." Ethan smiled, remembering that day 3 months ago that felt simultaneously like yesterday and a lifetime past. "Yeah, I think you're right about that." His laptop was open on the counter, displaying topographical maps and weather data for a training accident in Nevada. A pilot had ejected successfully, but landed in terrain so remote that ground teams were struggling with access. Ethan had been analyzing probable drift patterns based on wind speeds and parachute configurations, narrowing down the search area from 60 square miles to a manageable 12. It was the kind of work that had become routine over the past 3 months, combining his understanding of pilot behavior with careful analysis of environmental factors to give search teams the best possible starting point. He was good at it. Better than he'd expected, better than Morrison's team had hoped. In 3 months, he'd consulted on 17 cases, and 14 of them had resulted in successful rescues or recoveries. The 3 that hadn't still haunted him, pilots found too late, or not found at all. But Morrison kept reminding him that his success rate was unprecedented, that he was saving lives that would have been lost without his analysis. The work was challenging, intellectually engaging, and allowed him to operate primarily from home. He traveled to the command center 4 times for particularly complex cases, but Rosa had been available each time, and Mia's medical stability meant those absences didn't trigger the cascading anxiety they would have 3 months ago. It was, Ethan had to admit, the closest thing to a functional life he'd managed since leaving active duty. Not perfect, nothing involving a chronically ill child could be perfect, but workable in ways that felt sustainable rather than like constantly fighting against inevitable collapse. His phone rang. Tom Whitmore, calling for their weekly check-in. After the union organizing at Orion Motors had succeeded, helped by the publicity around Ethan's firing and the subsequent workforce walkout, Tom had become the shop steward, negotiating better conditions and pushing back against management in ways he'd never felt empowered to do before. "Ethan, you got a minute?" "For you, always." "What's going on?" "The new CEO. They brought in someone from outside, woman named Patricia Reeves. She wants to meet with you. Says she's trying to rebuild the company culture. Wants to understand what happened from your perspective." Ethan leaned against the counter, processing this unexpected development. "Why would I want to meet with Orion's new leadership? That chapter's closed, Tom." "I thought you'd say that. But here's the thing. Reeves is actually different. She's been implementing real changes. Better safety protocols, technical training programs, merit-based promotions instead of politics. The shop floor barely recognizes the place, and she specifically asked if you'd be willing to consult on building a maintenance training program that prioritizes skill over appearances. Consult, not come back as an employee." "Correct." Contract work, your schedule, your terms. She knows you're working with the Navy, isn't trying to pull you away from that, just wants your expertise in developing training that actually makes sense for mechanics instead of corporate bureaucrats. Ethan considered this. The old Orion had represented everything wrong with corporate culture: image over substance, fear over trust, disposability over investment in people. But if Tom was right, if things were genuinely changing, then maybe there was value in helping shape that change, rather than just walking away and letting someone else define what came next. I'd need to meet with her first. No commitments, just a conversation. She figured you'd say that too. She's proposing lunch tomorrow. Neutral location. Just the two of you talking. No pressure, no sales pitch, just an opportunity to see if there's mutual interest. Send me the details. I'll think about it. After Tom hung up, Ethan found himself staring at nothing, his mind working through implications and possibilities. Mia had moved to the living room, was sprawling on the couch with a book about astronauts that she'd insisted on checking out from the library, even though half the words were too advanced for her. She was sounding them out anyway, determined to understand, her resilience in the face of challenge a constant reminder of why everything else mattered less than her well-being. Princess, how would you feel if Daddy took on some extra work? Not instead of what I'm doing now, but in addition to it. Mia looked up from her book, considered the question with her usual gravity. Would it make you gone more? Maybe a little bit, but only if you're okay, and only when Rosa can be here with you. And it would help people? Like finding lost pilots helps people? Different kind of helping. Teaching mechanics to be better at their jobs so they can fix things properly and keep people safe. Then it sounds good. You should do it. She paused, then added, But Daddy, make sure you still have time for pancakes. Those are important too. Ethan crossed to the couch, sat beside his daughter, and pulled her into a gentle hug. Pancakes are absolutely important. That's a promise. The next day, Ethan met Patricia Reeves at a quiet cafe in Pasadena, far enough from Orion's headquarters to feel neutral, but close enough to not waste his afternoon. Reeves was in her early 50s, with the calm confidence of someone who'd earned respect through competence rather than demanding it through authority. She stood when Ethan arrived, shook his hand with a firm grip, and gestured to the table where she'd already ordered coffee for both of them. Mr. Cole, thank you for meeting with me. I know you have no reason to trust anyone associated with Orion Motors, so I appreciate you giving me this chance. Tom speaks highly of you. That counts for something. Tom Whitmore is one of the reasons I took this position. When the board approached me, I spent 2 weeks talking to employees at every level. Tom was honest about the company's problems in ways that management never would be. That kind of integrity from the shop floor told me there was something worth saving here, even if the leadership had been rotten. Ethan sipped his coffee, studying Reeves carefully. She met his gaze without flinching, without the defensive posturing he'd seen from so many executives who treated accountability as weakness. Tom said, "You're making changes," Ethan said. "I'm trying. Some have been easier than others. The safety protocols were obvious. We had equipment that should have been replaced years ago, procedures that prioritize speed over quality. I've doubled the maintenance budget and hired an outside consultant to audit our operations. The training program is harder because it requires changing how people think about the work, not just what tools they use. That's where I come in. If you're willing, I've read your personnel file, talked to people who worked with you. You weren't just a competent mechanic. You understood systems in ways that let you diagnose problems others missed. You advocated for doing things right even when it was inconvenient. That's the culture I'm trying to build, and I need people who embody those values to help design the training." Ethan set down his coffee cup, leaned back in his chair. "Ms. Reeves, I was fired from Orion for doing exactly what you're now saying you want to encourage. Excuse me if I'm skeptical that one leadership change suddenly transforms a company that spent years rewarding the opposite behavior. You should be skeptical. I would be too." Reeves pulled out her tablet, called up a document, slid it across the table. "This is the new operational charter I presented to the board last month. Read Section 4. Ethan scanned the document, found Section 4, and read, "Technical expertise and quality workmanship shall be prioritized over expedience and appearances in all operational decisions." Employees who advocate for proper procedures, even when those procedures conflict with short-term efficiency or client expectations, shall be supported by management. Retaliation against employees for prioritizing quality and safety is grounds for immediate termination of management personnel. Words on paper, Ethan said, but he was impressed despite himself. Lauren Hale probably had nice words on paper too. Lauren Hale had platitudes about excellence. I have specific enforceable policies with defined consequences for violations. I've already terminated 2 supervisors for pressuring mechanics to cut corners. The message is spreading. Quality matters. Expertise matters. And people who know what they're doing have authority to make the right call, even when it's not the easy call. Why do you care? Most CEOs optimize for quarterly profits and let everything else burn. Reeves smiled slightly. Because I spent 20 years as an engineer before moving into management. I've seen what happens when accountants make technical decisions, when image matters more than substance, when people who actually understand the work get overruled by people who only understand spreadsheets. It produces disasters, sometimes immediately visible ones, sometimes slow erosions that eventually cascade into catastrophic failures. I'm trying to prevent both. Ethan found himself wanting to believe her. But belief was dangerous when it came to corporate leadership, when people who seemed sincere could turn out to be just better at performing sincerity than their predecessors. What exactly are you asking from me? Contract consultation to develop a comprehensive training program for new mechanics and continuing education for existing staff. Focus on diagnostic thinking, systematic problem solving, and the confidence to advocate for proper procedures even under pressure. 20 hours a month, your schedule, primarily remote work with occasional on-site sessions. Compensation of $5,000 per month, plus you'd have input on hiring decisions for the training program's permanent staff. $5,000 a month was significant, not life-changing given his Navy contract, but enough to build real savings to create the financial cushion that had been missing for years. It was also, Ethan realized, an opportunity to influence an entire organization's culture, to prevent other mechanics from facing what he'd faced, to embed the values he believed in into a system that had rejected them. I need to think about it, Ethan said, and I need to talk to my daughter. She gets a say in decisions that affect how much time I have available. Of course. Tom mentioned she's been doing better recently. I'm glad the Navy's benefits are making a difference. You researched my personal situation. I researched the person I'm asking to help rebuild my company's culture. That includes understanding what motivates you, what your priorities are, what you need in order to do your best work. I know you left the Navy for your daughter. I know you've sacrificed career advancement to prioritize her care. I know you're not interested in empty prestige or titles that don't come with real authority. So I'm offering you influence without demanding you sacrifice what matters most. Ethan studied her for a long moment, looking for cracks in the presentation, for signs that this was just a more sophisticated version of corporate manipulation. But Reeves met his scrutiny calmly, her expression open, her posture relaxed. She believed what she was saying, or she was the best actor he'd ever encountered. I'll give you an answer by Friday, Ethan said finally. That's all I can ask. Whatever you decide, Mr. Cole, I want you to know that what happened to you was wrong, and it represented a failure of leadership that I'm committed to ensuring never happens again at Orion Motors. They parted with a handshake that felt more significant than it should have, and Ethan drove home through afternoon traffic thinking about second chances and institutional change and whether people could learn from past mistakes or if history just repeated with better marketing. Back at the apartment, he found Mia doing a nebulizer treatment while Rosa prepared dinner. The scene was so domestic, so normal, that it took Ethan a moment to remember how rare this had been just months ago, coming home to his daughter healthy enough to sit up, to a dinner that wasn't instant ramen or whatever had been on sale, to a life that contained enough breathing room to actually consider opportunities instead of just scrambling to avoid disasters. How was your meeting? Rosa asked while stirring pasta sauce that actually smelled homemade. Interesting. The new CEO at Orion wants to hire me as a consultant to rebuild their training program. Are you going to do it? I don't know yet. Part of me thinks it's a waste of energy to try fixing a broken system. Part of me thinks if I don't try, I'm just letting the next person get treated the way I was. What does your gut say? Ethan considered this. His gut said that Patricia Reeves was genuine, that the changes at Orion were real, and that he had an opportunity to turn his firing into something that prevented others from facing similar treatment. His gut also said that he had enough on his plate, that adding more work risked destabilizing the fragile balance he'd achieved, and that his first responsibility was to Mia, not to fixing corporate culture. My gut says I need to talk to my daughter. After Rosa left and dinner was finished and medications were administered with the routine efficiency of people who'd done this thousands of times, Ethan sat with Mia on the couch and explained the situation in terms she could understand. "So the company that fired you wants you to come back and teach people?" Mia asked, working through the logic. "Not come back like before. More like visiting sometimes to help them learn to do things better." "Why would you help them after they were mean to you?" "That's the question I'm trying to figure out, Princess. Part of me thinks they don't deserve my help. But part of me thinks if I can make things better for the people who work there, maybe something good comes from what happened." Mia was quiet for a moment, her small face scrunched in concentration. "At school, Ms. Rodriguez says that when someone does something wrong, you can either stay mad at them or you can help them be better. She says helping them be better is harder, but it's what makes the world nicer." Ms. Rodriguez sounds pretty smart. "She is. She lets me sit by the window when I'm having trouble breathing." Mia paused, then added, "I think you should help them, Daddy, but only if it doesn't make you too tired, because I need you to not be tired." "That's the deal, Princess. I only take on what I can handle without being too tired for pancakes and park visits and all the important stuff." "Then, okay, you should do it." Friday morning, Ethan called Patricia Reeves and accepted the consulting position, with the caveat that his Navy work took priority and that he maintained final say over his schedule. Reeves agreed without hesitation, sent over contracts that were surprisingly straightforward, and suggested they start with a series of interviews with current shop floor personnel to understand what training gaps existed. Over the next 6 weeks, Ethan spent 2 days a week at Orion Motors, talking to mechanics, observing operations, identifying the disconnect between what people knew and what they needed to know. He also noticed the changes Reeves had implemented: new equipment that actually worked, safety protocols that were being followed instead of ignored, a shop floor atmosphere that felt less like fear-based compliance and more like people taking pride in their work. Tom walked him through the changes the union had negotiated: better pay scales tied to skill development rather than seniority, protected time for training without pressure to cut corners, a grievance process that actually resulted in accountability when management overstepped. It wasn't perfect. Institutional change never was, but it was substantively different from the Orion Motors that had fired him 4 months ago. "You did this," Tom said one afternoon while they reviewed training curriculum proposals. "The union organizing, the leadership change, the cultural shift, none of it happens without you getting fired and the public response that followed." "I didn't do anything except refuse to compromise my principles." "Exactly. You showed everyone that it was possible to say no, that dignity mattered more than job security, that we didn't have to accept being treated as disposable. That example gave people courage to organize, gave the board reason to force out Lauren Hale, gave Patricia Reeves the mandate to make real changes. You were the catalyst." Ethan wasn't entirely comfortable with that characterization. It suggested an intentionality he hadn't possessed, a strategic thinking that hadn't existed when he was just a desperate father trying to survive his daughter's next medical crisis. But he understood what Tom meant. Sometimes the right action at the right moment could cascade into consequences far beyond the original intent. "How's Hale doing?" Ethan asked, surprising himself with the question. He'd thought about Lauren occasionally over the past months, wondering if losing her CEO position had taught her anything, or if she'd just landed at another company ready to repeat her mistakes. "Last I heard, she's doing consulting work, leadership training, ironically. Apparently her experience getting fired made her an expert on what not to do." Tom paused. "She asked about you a few months back, wanted to know if you'd be willing to meet with her. I told her I'd pass along the message, but I doubted you'd be interested." "What would be the point? Closure, maybe? Understanding? I don't know, but she seemed genuinely changed by the experience. Not that it erases what she did, but people can learn from their failures if they're willing to face them." Ethan filed that information away without committing to anything. Some conversations weren't worth having, some reconciliations weren't necessary for moving forward. but he found himself thinking about it more than he expected. About whether forgiveness required contact, about whether understanding someone's growth meant you owed them an audience, about whether his own evolution beyond bitterness required acknowledging her evolution beyond arrogance. 2 months after starting the consulting work with Orion, Commander Morrison called with an unusual request. "Ethan, we have a situation that's outside our normal parameters. Are you available for a video conference in the next hour? Mia has a doctor's appointment at 3, but before that, what's going on?" "I'd rather explain with the full team. This involves more than just search and rescue analysis." The video conference included Morrison, 3 officers Ethan didn't recognize, and Captain Jennifer Martinez, who smiled warmly when she saw him on screen. "Ethan, good to see you. How's Mia doing?" "Much better, thank you. The new medications are making a real difference." "I'm glad to hear it." Martinez's expression shifted to something more serious. "We've asked you to join this call because we have a proposal that goes beyond your current contract. The Navy is developing a new training program for search and rescue operations with focus on human factors analysis, understanding how pilots think and behave under extreme stress, predicting decision-making patterns that can inform search parameters. We want you to develop and lead that program." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "Lead it? As in full-time employment?" "As in a civilian instructor position based at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey. You'd teach courses, develop curriculum, consult on active operations when needed, full benefits, competitive salary, relocation assistance, and most importantly, a schedule designed around teaching rather than operational deployments. You'd have your evenings and weekends with your daughter, summer breaks that align with her school schedule, and the stability of a permanent position instead of contract work." It was, Ethan realized, everything he'd thought was impossible. A use of his skills that mattered, compensation that would let him provide properly for Mia, stability that didn't require sacrificing his presence in her life. It was also a complete upheaval of the life they'd just finished stabilizing. A move to a new city, new schools, new doctors, new everything. "I need to think about this," Ethan said. "And I need to talk to Mia. She's been through enough changes." "Of course, we're not asking for an immediate decision. But Ethan, I want you to understand what this represents. A chance to influence how the entire Navy approaches search and rescue operations. Your methods, your insights, your understanding of pilot psychology, you'd be embedding all of that into training that could save lives for decades. That's a legacy worth considering." After the call ended, Ethan sat in his home office staring at nothing, trying to process an opportunity that was simultaneously perfect and terrifying. The salary alone would change everything. He could afford specialists for Mia that weren't covered by insurance, could build real savings, could stop constantly calculating whether they could afford basic necessities. The position would use his skills in exactly the way he'd always hoped, teaching instead of just consulting, shaping future operations instead of just responding to current crises. But it also meant leaving Los Angeles, where Mia's current medical team knew her case intimately, where Rosa had become family, where the support systems they'd built over 6 years would have to be reconstructed from scratch. It meant asking his daughter to adapt to yet another major change after she'd just started thriving in their current situation. That evening, after Mia's appointment with the pulmonologist, who'd declared her improvement remarkable and suggested they might actually be approaching manageable stability rather than constant crisis intervention, Ethan made dinner while working up the courage to explain the situation. Mia was drawing at the kitchen table, creating an elaborate picture of helicopters and mountains, and what appeared to be either rescue teams or possibly aliens. It was hard to tell with her artistic style. She'd been drawing a lot lately, her teachers noting that she had genuine talent for visual storytelling. One more thing that was flourishing now that she had the energy and cognitive space for interest beyond just surviving. "Princess, I need to talk to you about something important." Mia set down her crayons, gave him her full attention with the seriousness she applied to all designated important conversations. "Is it bad important or good important?" "It's complicated important. The Navy offered me a permanent job teaching people how to find lost pilots. It would pay well, it would use my skills in a good way, and I'd have regular hours so I could be home with you most of the time." "That sounds good. The complicated part is that the job is in a city called Monterey, which is about 6 hours north of here. We'd have to move, you'd have to change schools and doctors. Rosa couldn't come with us. Everything would be different. Mia processed this information with visible concentration. Would I still be sick in Monterey? The question hit Ethan hard. The recognition that his daughter understood her illness was the constant around which all other variables revolved. Yes, princess, but we'd find new doctors there, good ones who could keep helping you get better. Would you be happier? In the new job? I think so, but not if it makes things harder for you. Your happiness matters more than mine. Mia shook her head with surprising firmness. Miss Rodriguez says that's wrong. She says parents deserve to be happy too, not just kids. And she says when parents are happy, it makes kids happier because they don't have to worry about their parents being sad all the time. Ethan wanted to laugh and cry simultaneously. His 6-year-old daughter was counseling him on self-care, using wisdom from her first-grade teacher to argue that his well-being mattered independent of hers. When had she become so perceptive, so capable of thinking beyond her own needs? What do you think we should do, he asked. I think we should go, because you've been taking care of me my whole life, and maybe it's time for you to do something that makes you happy instead of just something that keeps us from being too sad. And also because Monterey sounds pretty. Does it have an ocean? It does, right there in the city. Then we should definitely go. I've never seen an ocean except in pictures. Over the next week, Ethan called Morrison and accepted the position. He gave notice to Patricia Reeves, who was disappointed to lose his consulting work, but understood that teaching at the Naval Postgraduate School was too significant an opportunity to pass up. He told Rosa, who cried but insisted she was happy for them, promised to visit, and helped him start planning the logistics of a move that felt impossibly complicated until they broke it down into manageable steps. He also, after weeks of internal debate, sent a message to Lauren Hale asking if she'd be willing to meet before he left Los Angeles. Her response came within an hour, a simple yes and a suggestion for the same cafe where he'd met with Patricia Reeves. They met on a Saturday morning, Mia safely with Rosa, so Ethan could have this conversation without worrying about his daughter overhearing something she shouldn't. Lauren looked different than he remembered, less severe, more human, wearing jeans and a simple blouse instead of the power suits that had been her armor. She stood when he arrived, offered her hand tentatively, as if uncertain whether he'd accept even that minimal contact. Ethan, thank you for agreeing to this. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either. He sat across from her, accepted the coffee she'd ordered for him, and waited for her to explain why she'd wanted this meeting. I've been in therapy, Lauren said without preamble, working through some things, trying to understand why I became the kind of leader who could fire someone without knowing anything about their circumstances. My therapist suggested that part of my healing would involve apologizing directly to people I'd harmed, but only if they were willing to hear it. So I'm asking, are you willing to hear my apology? Ethan studied her carefully. She looked nervous, uncertain, stripped of the commanding presence that had defined her tenure at Orion. I'm here. I'm listening. What I did to you was cruel and unjustified. I fired you to make a point about my authority, to demonstrate that I wouldn't tolerate anyone questioning my decisions. I didn't care about your circumstances, didn't consider that you might have reasons for your actions that went beyond simple insubordination. I treated you as a problem to be eliminated rather than a person with a life beyond my convenience. Lauren's voice wavered. And then when the consequences came, when I had to face what I'd actually done, I realized I'd become exactly the kind of leader I'd always despised. Someone who valued control over compassion, who saw people as assets rather than human beings. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to hear it. Because my growth shouldn't require your participation, but my accountability does. And because I want you to know that what happened to you changed me in ways that are permanent. I'll never lead the same way again. I'll never fire someone without understanding their full situation. I'll never prioritize image over the actual well-being of people who depend on me for their livelihood. Ethan sipped his coffee, buying time to organize his response. Part of him wanted to walk away, to deny Lauren the closure she was seeking because closure wasn't something he owed her. But another part recognized that her apology was genuine, that her growth was real, and that his own evolution beyond bitterness required acknowledging her transformation. I accept your apology, Ethan said finally. Not because what you did was okay, it wasn't, and the consequences could have destroyed my daughter's life. But because I believe people can learn from their mistakes if they're willing to face them honestly. You faced yours. That counts for something. Lauren's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. Thank you. That's more grace than I deserve. Maybe, but I've learned something over these past months, that holding on to anger takes energy I don't have to spare, and that forgiveness isn't about excusing harm, but about refusing to let that harm define your future. So I'm forgiving you, Lauren. Not for your benefit, but for mine. They talked for another hour, Lauren asking about Mia's health and Ethan's new position, genuinely interested in his life in ways that felt nothing like the performative concern executives often displayed. She told him about her consulting work, about teaching leadership courses that emphasized exactly what she'd failed to practice at Orion, about trying to prevent others from making her mistakes. When they finally parted, it was with a handshake that felt like actual closure, not friendship, probably never friendship, but a mutual recognition that they'd both grown beyond the people they'd been in that workshop 4 months ago. The move to Monterey happened in stages over the next 6 weeks. Ethan and Mia drove up first to find housing, ending up with a small house near the water with a yard where Mia could play and windows that opened to ocean breezes. They found a new pulmonologist who reviewed Mia's records and seemed genuinely excellent. They toured her new school where the principal personally showed them around and promised that Mia's medical needs would be accommodated without stigma. On their last night in Los Angeles, Rosa came over with homemade tamales and way too many gifts for Mia. They ate together in the mostly empty apartment, boxes stacked against the walls. The life they'd built here reduced to cardboard and packing tape. I'm going to miss you both so much, Rosa said, holding Mia tight while the girl promised to video call every week and send drawings of the ocean. We couldn't have made it without you, Ethan told her. You were family when we didn't have anyone else. You gave me purpose, taking care of Mia, watching her grow despite everything, being part of your lives. That mattered more than you know. Rosa wiped her eyes. But I'm happy you're getting this chance. Both of you deserve better than barely surviving. You deserve to actually thrive. The drive to Monterey the next morning felt like crossing into a different world. They stopped at scenic overlooks, Mia pressing her face against the window to watch the Pacific Ocean emerge beside the highway, her excitement building as they got closer to their destination. By the time they pulled up to their new house, she was practically vibrating with anticipation. It's perfect, Daddy. Can we go see the ocean right now? Let's unload a few boxes first, then absolutely. They spent the afternoon walking along the beach, Mia collecting shells and squealing when waves surprised her feet, Ethan watching his daughter engage with wonder in ways she'd rarely had energy for back in Los Angeles. The ocean air seemed to agree with her lungs, or maybe it was just that she felt safe enough to fully experience joy instead of rationing it against the constant awareness of limitation. That evening, in their new house that still smelled like fresh paint and possibility, Ethan tucked Mia into her new bed surrounded by boxes they hadn't unpacked yet. Are you happy we moved? She asked, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight. Yeah, Princess. I think this is going to be really good for both of us. Me too. And Daddy, thank you for finding the lost pilot, because if you hadn't found her, none of this would have happened. We'd still be in the old apartment and you'd still be sad all the time, and I'd still be having trouble breathing so much. Ethan felt his throat tighten with emotion too big to contain comfortably. Sometimes things work out in ways we don't expect. Sometimes the worst moments lead to better things if we're willing to keep going. Ms. Rodriguez would call that a lesson about perseverance. Ms. Rodriguez was a very wise teacher. My new teacher probably won't be as good, but that's okay. I can teach her about perseverance. Ethan laughed, kissed his daughter's forehead, and left her to fall asleep in a room that was hers, in a house that was theirs, in a city full of new possibilities they'd earned together. The next morning, he started his position at the Naval Postgraduate School. The facilities were impressive, the staff welcoming, the students, active duty personnel training for search and rescue operations, respectful and genuinely interested in learning from someone whose track record spoke for itself. Commander Morrison was there for his first day, helping him navigate institutional procedures, introducing him to key personnel, ensuring his transition went smoothly. How does it feel? She asked during a lunch break. Surreal. Good, but surreal. I keep waiting for something to go wrong. That's trauma talking. Give it time. Eventually you'll believe that good things can be stable instead of just temporary reprieves between crises. Morrison paused. For what it's worth, we're honored to have you here. What you're going to teach these people will save lives for decades. That's not hyperbole. That's just fact. Over the next months, Ethan built his curriculum, taught his first courses, consulted on active operations when his particular expertise was needed. He found he loved teaching, the challenge of translating intuitive understanding into communicable principles, the satisfaction of watching students grasp concepts that would make them better at saving lives, the sense that he was building something lasting instead of just responding to immediate crises. Mia thrived in Monterey. Her new pulmonologist adjusted her medications with precision that led to even better symptom control. Her new school embraced her without making her medical condition the defining feature of her identity. She made friends who invited her to birthday parties and playdates. She joined an art class where her drawings of helicopters and mountains and rescue operations impressed teachers who encouraged her talent. On a Saturday morning, 6 months after their move, Ethan and Mia were making pancakes, their ritual maintained across cities and circumstances, when his phone rang. Captain Martinez, who'd become something like a friend, checking in periodically to see how they were adjusting. Ethan, I'm calling with news. The Navy is establishing a new medal for civilian personnel who make extraordinary contributions to operational success. You're the first recipient. They want to present it at a ceremony next month, and they'd like Mia to be there if she's well enough. Ethan looked at his daughter, who was carefully flipping pancakes with the intense concentration she applied to everything, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. A medal was nice, recognition was meaningful, but the real reward was this: ordinary mornings making breakfast with his healthy, happy daughter, a life that had room for pancakes and art classes, and walking on the beach without constant crisis management. I'll be there, he said, and Mia would love to come. Thank you, Jennifer, for everything. Thank you for bringing me home, for using your gifts even when it would have been easier to walk away, for showing all of us that integrity matters more than convenience. After the call ended, Ethan served pancakes to his daughter, who'd added chocolate chips without being asked because she knew that was how he liked them best. They ate together at their kitchen table, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the ocean, and Ethan thought about the journey that had brought them here, from a cramped apartment where survival was the only goal, through public humiliation and private struggles, to a life that actually felt worth living instead of just worth enduring. What are you thinking about? Mia asked, her face smeared with chocolate. How lucky I am to be your dad. Even when I'm expensive and complicated? Especially then. The best things usually are. Mia considered this wisdom, then returned to her pancakes with the satisfaction of someone who'd received exactly the answer she needed. And Ethan sat across from her, watching his daughter eat breakfast in their house by the ocean, and understood with absolute certainty that every impossible choice, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt and fear and desperate determination had been worth it. Not because the universe rewarded virtue with cosmic justice, not because good deeds guaranteed reciprocal kindness, but because sometimes, if you held on long enough and refused to compromise what mattered most, life surprised you with grace you hadn't earned and possibilities you hadn't dared to imagine. The medal ceremony would come next month. His students would continue learning, would go on to save lives using principles he'd taught them. Orion Motors would continue its transformation, proving that institutions could evolve beyond their worst instincts. Lauren Hale would continue her own journey toward becoming a better leader, carrying lessons learned through consequence and reflection. But right now, in this moment, none of that mattered as much as pancakes with chocolate chips, ocean views through clean windows, and a daughter who was learning that perseverance could lead to joy instead of just to the next crisis. Ethan Cole had been a Navy pilot, a search and rescue specialist, a mechanic, a fired employee, a viral story, a consultant, and now a teacher. But the role that had always mattered most, the identity that had driven every decision and defined every priority, was the simplest one. He was Mia's father. And watching her laugh over breakfast, healthy enough to be silly, secure enough to be a kid, happy enough to believe that good things could last, that was the victory that eclipsed every rescue, every recognition, every professional accomplishment. Being a good dad wasn't about helicopters or headlines or the dramatic moments that made compelling stories. It was about showing up for pancake mornings, about choosing presents over prestige, about building a life where your daughter believed she deserved happiness because you'd shown her it was possible. That was the quietest victory, the bravest choice, the most important role he'd ever played. And standing in his kitchen in Monterey, watching his daughter discover joy in ordinary moments, Ethan Cole finally understood that he'd succeeded at the thing that mattered most. Everything else was just details.